friends. With a sprawling coastline of over 7,500 kilometers, an exclusive economic zone, EEZ, exceeding 2 million square kilometers, and a highly strategic position astride the vital sea lanes of communication in the Indian Ocean, India is inherently a maritime nation. Today, our oceans are no longer viewed merely as channels for trade or boundaries for defense, but as a primary driver of sustainable economic growth, a concept known as the blue economy. The blue economy emphasizes the sustainable use of ocean resources for economic growth, improved livelihoods, and jobs while preserving the health of marine ecosystems. As India marches toward its vision of becoming a developed nation by 2047, Viksit Bharat, unlocking our maritime potential is not just an option, but an absolute strategic imperative. 2. Strategic pillars of India's blue economy. 1.5 minutes. To harness the true potential of our maritime ecosystem, the Government of India has transitioned to Blue Economy 2.0, an integrated framework focusing on sustainable, climate-resilient coastal and deep-sea development. This is built upon several core pillars: port-led development and infrastructure. Through the flagship Sagarmala program, India is radically transforming its maritime logistics. As of 2026, major Indian ports have crossed a milestone by handling over 915 million tons of cargo annually. The development of mega transshipment ports like Vadhavan in Maharashtra is aimed at capturing global shipping traffic and slashing logistics costs. Sustainable deep-sea fisheries. Niti Aayog recently released a roadmap titled India's Blue Economy, Strategy for Harnessing Deep-Sea and Offshore Fisheries. Backed by the sustainable harnessing of fisheries in the EEZ rules, India is legally shifting from an open access model to a strictly regulated, scientifically managed system. This safeguards artisanal fishers while promoting advanced, large vessel technology to harvest resources sustainably up to 200 nautical miles out. Deep Ocean Mission and Offshore Energy. Launched by the Ministry of Earth Sciences, the Deep Ocean Mission exploring deep-sea mining, polymetallic nodules, and marine biodiversity positions India among an elite group of nations capable of underwater technological exploration. Simultaneously, tapping into offshore wind, tidal energy, and blue carbon, mangrove restoration, forms the core of India's green energy transitions. 3. Financial and legislative overhaul. 1 minute. A critical shift in India's approach is the transition from mere policy planning to robust financial and legal enablement. The financial backbone. To address the capital-intensive nature of the maritime sector, the government recently transformed the Sagarmala Development Company into the Sagarmala Finance Corporation Limited, SMFCL, India's first dedicated maritime NBFC, which has already sanctioned over 10,700 crore rupees for maritime infrastructure. Additionally, the establishment of the Maritime Investment Fund, MIF, ensures long-term institutional capital for shipbuilding and logistics. Modernizing maritime law. Recognizing that centuries-old laws stifle growth, India introduced a comprehensive legislative overhaul with the Coastal Shipping Bill, Merchant Shipping Bill, and the Indian Ports Bill. These legal updates improve the ease of doing business, integrate state maritime boards, and mandate strict ecological safeguards. IV. Misuse, challenges, and the correct balance. 1.5 minutes. While the opportunities are vast, the maritime frontier presents severe environmental, security, and geopolitical challenges that require a balanced approach. The challenge of overexploitation and pollution. Oceans are highly sensitive ecosystems. Rapid port expansion, coastal industrialization, and plastic pollution threaten marine biodiversity and cause severe coastal erosion. Unchecked commercial bottom trawling can destroy marine habitats. The correct use. Economic growth must not come at the cost of ecology. Under Blue Economy 2.0, infrastructure projects must incorporate marine spatial planning, MSP, and climate-adaptive safeguards, ensuring that conservation efforts, like mangrove and coral reef restoration, happen side by side with port development. Geopolitical security, Sagar Vision. The Indian Ocean region is witnessing intense geopolitical friction and a rise in illegal, unreported, and unregulated IUU fishing by foreign distant water fleets. The correct use. India must strictly enforce its new EEZ rules and enhance maritime domain awareness through its Sagar, Security and Growth for All in the Region initiative. Ensuring security and rules-based order in the region protects both national sovereignty and the livelihoods of millions of domestic fishers. Conclusion. 0.5 minute. In conclusion, India's maritime future is deeply intertwined with its economic and strategic destiny. The transition to a sustainable blue economy represents a shift from exploitation to responsible stewardship. By combining massive infrastructure modernization like Sagarmala, path-breaking scientific endeavors like the Deep Ocean Mission, and robust financial platforms like SMFCL, India is well on its way to securing its position as a global maritime powerhouse. The sea lanes of tomorrow will belong to nations that can balance economic ambition with ecological restraint. Thank you. The role of the Indian Coast Guard in maritime security. Introduction, 1 minute. Good morning, friends. With a sprawling coastline of over 7,500 kilometers, more than 1,300 islands, and a massive exclusive economic zone, EEZ, of over 2 million square kilometers, India's economic and strategic prosperity is deeply tied to the ocean. While the Indian Navy handles external threats and wartime operations, the daily enforcement of maritime law and safety falls upon the Indian Coast Guard, ICG. Formed in 1977 and operating under the Ministry of Defence, the ICG celebrated its Golden Jubilee, 50th Raising Day, on February 1, 2026. Guided by its solemn motto, Vayam Rakshama, we protect, the ICG has grown into the world's fourth largest coast guard, serving as the de facto, frontline force, and a wall of trust for India's multi-layered maritime security. 2. Core Charter of Duties and Jurisdiction, 1.5 minutes. The ICG's security matrix bridges the gap between coastal state police forces and the blue water Indian Navy. Its primary responsibilities span across several key areas: maritime law enforcement and anti-smuggling. The ICG actively patrols India's contiguous zone and EEZ to prevent smuggling, illegal fishing, human trafficking, and maritime piracy. Since its inception, its regular interdiction operations have seized contraband and narcotics worth thousands of crores. Maritime Search and Rescue, SA. The ICG acts as the primary agency for saving lives at sea, coordinating complex rescue operations for distressed merchant vessels, stranded mariners, and domestic fishers during rough weather and cyclones. To date, it has successfully saved over 11,800 lives at sea. Marine Environmental Protection. The ICG is the national coordinating authority for responding to major oil spills and hazardous chemical leaks, ensuring the preservation of fragile coastal ecosystems. Offshore Security. It ensures the physical protection of critical national infrastructure, including offshore oil platforms, gas installations, and vital mineral exploration zones. 3. Post-2008 Transformation and Recent Operations, 1.5 minutes. The 2008 Mumbai terror attacks marked a paradigm shift in India's coastal defense architecture. The ICG was officially designated as the authority responsible for coastal security in territorial waters, managing overall coordination between central and state agencies. System, Operation. Strategic Application. Real-World Impact, 2025-2026, Coastal Surveillance Network, CSN, Chain of Static Radars, IS, Day, Night Cameras, and Meteorological Sensors along the coast. Achieved near gap-free electronic surveillance of the entire coastline through Phase 2 upgrades. Operation Sindoor, 2025-2026, Advanced Deployment of Strategic Assets and Heightened Alert in Highly Sensitive Western Coastal and Creek Regions. Heavily praised by the Ministry of Defence for demonstrating seamless inter-service coordination under tight security environments. Bilateral Interoperability. Joint high-level engagements and exercises, e.g., the 22nd high-level meeting with the Japan Coast Guard in January 2026. Executed complex pollution and hazardous substance response drills in Mumbai to boost regional rules-based maritime order. Community interaction, CIPs, educating and treating coastal fishermen networks as local strategic resources. Transformed the fishing community into the effective eyes and ears of coastal security to report suspicious vessel tracking. IV. Challenges, misuse, and the way forward, 1 minute. Despite its commendable expansion, the Indian Coast Guard operates within an increasingly volatile maritime environment. The challenge of technology and non-state threats, modern hybrid threats, asymmetric warfare, and the use of small, unregistered fishing boats by terrorists or drug cartels make physical monitoring immensely difficult. The correct solution: the ICG must continue upgrading its technological edge. The current focus on procuring shipborne unmanned aerial systems, UAVs, and advanced search and rescue simulators will ensure better over-the-horizon tracking without draining manpower. The challenge of the blue economy. With the rapid expansion of India's blue economy, marked by massive port construction, offshore wind fields, and deeper commercial fishing, traditional law enforcement can sometimes be misconstrued as an operational bottleneck for economic trade. The correct balance: security and prosperity must go hand in hand. The ICG must maintain a hub-and-spoke partnership with the local marine police, providing structural training and streamlining standard operating procedures, SOPs, so that legal enforcement remains robust but efficient for domestic trade. Conclusion, 0.5 minute. In conclusion, the Indian Coast Guard has successfully evolved from a modest auxiliary force into a massive, modern, and irreplaceable pillar of India's national security framework. By maintaining constant vigilance across our vast coastlines, protecting our marine wealth, and acting as the first responder to human and ecological emergencies at sea, the ICG secures the very foundations of our maritime future. As India marches toward its 2047 roadmap of becoming a developed nation, the men and women of the Coast Guard stand ready, keeping true to their promise. Vayam Rakshama, we protect. Thank you. Credible minimum deterrence. Introduction. 1 minute. Good morning, friends. In the realm of global geopolitics, nuclear weapons are often viewed as tools of ultimate destruction. However, India holds a distinct posture, viewing its nuclear arsenal not as war-fighting instruments, but as political weapons of absolute restraint and deterrence. Formally adopted in 2003, India's nuclear doctrine is anchored in the principle of credible minimum deterrence, CMD, coupled with a strict no first use, NFU, policy. As a responsible nuclear-armed state facing a unique two-front security challenge from nuclear-armed neighbors, understanding how India balances defensive moral positions with hard power readiness is crucial for national security. 2. Core pillars of the doctrine. 1 minute. India's nuclear framework rests on three non-negotiable pillars that define its defensive yet punitive character. Credible minimum deterrence, CMD. India maintains the minimum number of nuclear warheads necessary to convincingly deter any adversary from launching a nuclear attack. It does not engage in a numbers-based arms race but focuses on the credibility of its retaliatory capability. No first use, NFU. India binds itself to never initiate a nuclear strike. However, this policy is strictly qualified. A nuclear response will be triggered if Indian territory or Indian forces anywhere are attacked with nuclear, chemical, or biological weapons. Massive punitive retaliation. Should deterrence fail and an adversary strikes first, India's doctrine mandates a second strike retaliation that is massive and designed to inflict unacceptable damage on the attacker. Civilian political control. The authority to release nuclear weapons rests solely with the civilian political leadership, specifically the Nuclear Command Authority, NCA, headed by the Prime Minister. 3. Evolution, triad, and recent strategic shifts. 1.5 minutes. To make a no first use posture genuinely credible, a nation must possess a highly survivable nuclear triad. The ability to launch nuclear weapons from land, air, and sea. This ensures that even if a first strike destroys land bases, the capability to retaliate remains intact. Triad component. Platform, delivery systems. Strategic role. Land-based. Agni series, Agni V with MIRV capability, deep strategic penetration across the continent. Air-based. Strategic bombers, Mirage 2000H, Jaguar, Rafale, tactical flexibility and rapid deployment. Sea-based. Arihant-class SSBNs, INS Arihant, INS Aridhaman, ultimate survivability, the backbone of a secure second strike. Historically, India kept its warheads strictly separated from delivery systems during peacetime to prevent accidental launches. However, recent geopolitical dynamics have forced an evolutionary shift. According to the 2026 SIPRI yearbook, India's nuclear stockpile has grown to an estimated 190 warheads, overtaking Pakistan's arsenal of 170 for the first time. More importantly, India is transitioning toward canisterized missile systems and has reportedly deployed a small number of live warheads aboard its nuclear ballistic missile submarines, SSBNs, on deterrence patrols. This operational transition ensures that our second strike capability is ready at much shorter notice, directly enhancing the credibility of our minimum deterrence. IV. Challenges, misuse, and the correct path. 1 minute. Maintaining a doctrine of minimum deterrence while surrounded by expanding arsenals brings forward complex challenges. The challenge of a changing threat profile. While Pakistan historically relied on nuclear brinkmanship and tactical nuclear weapons, India's primary strategic focus has shifted heavily toward China, which rapidly expanded its arsenal to over 600 warheads. This creates pressure on the minimum definition of India's doctrine. Misuse, misinterpretation. Critics sometimes argue that the NFU policy binds India's hands, making it vulnerable to a devastating surprise attack. This has led to occasional public debates about whether India should abandon NFU for a preemptive stance. The correct use. Abandoning NFU would destabilize the region and destroy India's standing as a responsible global power. The correct path lies not in changing the doctrine, but in technological modernization. By developing multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicles, MIRV, like Mission Divyastra and strengthening ballistic missile defense, BMD, shields, India ensures its second strike remains unstoppable without needing an excessively large, expensive stockpile. Conclusion, 0.5 minute. In conclusion, India's nuclear doctrine is a masterclass in strategic balance. It combines the ethical restraint of a democratic nation with the unflinching military resolve needed to protect sovereignty. By anchoring itself to credible minimum deterrence, India avoids the economic and systemic drain of a Cold War-style arms race. As our sea-based deterrence matures and technological capabilities grow, India stands well equipped to ensure peace through strength, proving that true deterrence lies not in the desire to strike first, but in the absolute certainty of a devastating second blow. Thank you. Lecturette topic: Critical Minerals and India's Strategic Security. Lecturette topic: Operation Sindoor and its Strategic Significance. Introduction, 1 minute. Good morning, friends. In May 2025, the Indian subcontinent witnessed a historic paradigm shift in its security dynamics with the execution of Operation Sindoor. Triggered by a brutal terrorist attack on April 22, 2025, in Pahalgam, Jammu and Kashmir, which claimed the lives of 26 innocent civilians, India abandoned traditional strategic restraint. Conceived not just as a tactical retaliation but as a comprehensive punitive campaign, Operation Sindoor involved a synchronized, high-tech, tri-services assault alongside unprecedented diplomatic and economic maneuvers. Today, we will analyze how this operation redefined India's national security doctrine, established new strategic red lines, and showcased the power of Atmanirbhar, self-reliant, defense innovation. 2. The kinetic execution, redefining the rules of engagement, 1.5 minutes. Operation Sindoor stood out due to its rapid, multi-front, and deeply penetrative execution, shattering long-held Pakistani assumptions of nuclear immunity. Surgical precision air operations, moving past localized strikes along the line of control, LOC, the Indian Air Force launched cross-border precision strikes deep into Pakistan's heartland, targeting terror infrastructure in the Punjab province and Bahawalpur. Utilizing Rafale fighter jets armed with Scalp missiles and Hammer smart bombs, the IAF bypassed and jammed Pakistan's Chinese-supplied air defense networks, executing the primary mission in just 23 minutes. Dismantling terror infrastructure, the initial waves successfully eliminated 9 major terror launchpads belonging to Lashkar-e-Taiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed, and Hizbul Mujahideen in Pakistan and POK, neutralizing over 100 terrorists and high-profile commanders. Neutralizing retaliation. When Pakistan attempted to retaliate using drones, loitering munitions, and artillery against border infrastructure, India's layered ground-based air defenses, GBAD, including the indigenous Akash missile system and advanced counter-UAS technologies, effectively blunted the aerial assault without any loss of Indian military assets. 3. Tri-service synergy and indigenous power, 1.5 minutes. Operation Sindoor served as the ultimate testing ground for joint military doctrines and domestic defense manufacturing. Armed Force, ARM. Strategic role in Operation Sindoor. Impact and performance. Indian Air Force and Army. Deep kinetic strikes and layered air defense mesh. Destroyed enemy radar nodes and prevented counter-attacks on Indian airfields. Indian Navy. Forward deployment of a full carrier battle group, CBG. Imposed an effective maritime blockade close to the Makran coast, completely restricting the Pakistan Navy's movements. Border security and Coast Guard. Frontline vigilance, anti-infiltration, and maritime border shielding. BSF successfully neutralized cross-border infiltrators in the Samba district. The ICG deployed strategic assets early to secure coastal zones. The Atmanirbhar milestone, the seamless operation of net-centric warfare platforms, long-range drones, and satellite-guided munitions validated India's massive decade-long budgetary investments in indigenous defense R&D. IV. The strategic shift and non-military leverage, 1 minute. The true significance of Operation Sindoor lies in its long-term strategic and geopolitical implications. A new red line. India sent an absolute message to the global community: if cross-border terrorism is used as state policy, the response will be visible, forceful, and unhindered by geographic boundaries. It effectively decoupled the Kashmir narrative, reframing the conflict strictly through the lens of counterterrorism. The weaponization of water. In a historic non-kinetic move, India announced the suspension of the Indus Waters Treaty, IWT, declaring that blood and water cannot flow together. By holding the treaty in abeyance, India asserted its right to build vital reservoirs and hydro projects on the western Jhelum and Chenab rivers, choking Pakistan's fragile, agricultural-dependent economy and demonstrating massive economic leverage. Conclusion, 0.5 minute. In conclusion, Operation Sindoor will go down in military history as the watershed moment that permanently altered the security equilibrium of South Asia. By successfully combining hyper-precise kinetic force with severe economic and diplomatic consequences, India demonstrated the maturation of its comprehensive national power. It proved that a nation's sovereignty is protected not by passive defense, but by the absolute readiness to deliver a crushing, multi-dimensional response. As future leaders of the armed forces, the lesson for us is clear. Modern victory requires technological superiority, flawless inter-service jointness, and unwavering strategic clarity. Thank you. This video report analyzes the massive defense architecture, advanced satellite-guided intelligence, and multi-front deployment that turned the mission into one of the region's most significant high-tech actions. Operation Sindoor, India's biggest military spend? POK terror camps destroyed. Based on your preference for structured SSB Lecturette topics, let's dive into a highly relevant and contemporary international relations topic, India's Act East Policy and Regional Security. SSB Lecturette, India's Act East Policy and Regional Security. 1. Introduction and Overview. Good morning, worthy Group Testing Officer and my dear friends. Today, I am going to speak on the topic, India's Act East Policy and Regional Security. Originally launched in 1991 as the Look East Policy by the Narasimha Rao government, it was upgraded to the Act East Policy (APE) by Prime Minister Narendra Modi at the East Asia Summit in 2014. The core difference lies in the transition from purely economic ties to proactive strategic, defense, and cultural integration. The focus area of APE centers on the ASEAN, Association of Southeast Asian Nations, bloc, alongside key Indo-Pacific partners like Japan, South Korea, and Australia. The policy stands on 4 pillars: commerce, culture, connectivity, and capacity building. 2. Strategic objectives and regional security. In the context of modern geopolitics, regional security is the ultimate cornerstone of the Act East policy. Countering Chinese hegemony, the Indo-Pacific region, particularly the South China Sea, is witnessing aggressive Chinese expansionism, the 9-line. India's presence acts as a net security provider, ensuring a free, open, and inclusive Indo-Pacific. Maritime security and SLOCs. Over 55% of India's trade passes through the Strait of Malacca and the South China Sea. Ensuring the security of sea lines of communication, SLOCs, against piracy and state aggression is vital for India's economic survival. The Quad and bilateral defense ties. India has deepened defense cooperation under the Quad framework: India, US, Japan, Australia. Bilaterally, India now conducts complex military exercises, like Samudra Shakti with Indonesia and SIMBEX with Singapore, and has signed logistics sharing agreements with Japan and Australia. Securing the Northeast Gateway, the Act East policy starts at home. Developing India's northeastern states by connecting them to Myanmar and Thailand secures our borders against insurgencies and cross-border crime. 3. Real examples and successes. Defense exports. India successfully exported the BrahMos supersonic cruise missiles to the Philippines. This serves as a direct strategic deterrent against aggressive maritime incursions in the West Philippine Sea. Infrastructure and connectivity. The Kaladan Multimodal Transit Transport Project, connecting Kolkata Port with Sit Port in Myanmar, and the India-Myanmar-Thailand Trilateral Highway are monumental steps toward bypassing the Chicken's Neck corridor and integrating economies. Sabang Port Development. India is collaborating with Indonesia to develop the deep-sea port of Sabang. Located right at the entrance of the Strait of Malacca, this gives the Indian Navy a massive strategic vantage point. 4. Misuse, bottlenecks, and shortcomings. While the policy sounds flawless on paper, its implementation has suffered from critical flaws, bureaucratic hurdles and delay in execution. India is notorious for project delays. The Trilateral Highway and Kaladan project have missed multiple deadlines, allowing China's Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, to outpace us in funding and speed. Over-securitization at the cost of economy. India pulled out of the RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, due to domestic dairy and manufacturing fears. By opting out of the region's largest trade bloc, India's economic integration under Act East has weakened, making it look purely military-centric. Political instability in neighbors. The military coup and ongoing civil unrest in Myanmar have severely choked India's land bridge initiatives to the rest of Southeast Asia. 5. Way forward and correct utilization. To fully realize the potential of the Act East policy and ensure robust regional security, India must adopt a sharp, result-oriented approach. Under promise and over-deliver, India needs to establish a dedicated, fast-track project management cell to complete connectivity projects within strict deadlines. Execution speed is our biggest diplomatic currency. Strengthen the culture component. Leverage India's deep-rooted Buddhist and Hindu historical ties with Southeast Asia to build soft power trust, positioning India as a natural, non-exploitative partner compared to China's debt-trap diplomacy. Deepen unilateralism, expand defense partnerships beyond the Quad. Collaborative security frameworks with middle powers like Vietnam, Indonesia, and the Philippines will create a resilient network that prevents a unipolar Asia. 6. Conclusion. To conclude, India's Act East policy is no longer just a foreign policy choice, it is a geopolitical necessity. By transforming our Northeast into a hub of connectivity, delivering on our infrastructure promises, and acting as a dependable defense partner, India can effectively maintain the balance of power in the Indo-Pacific. A secure East ensures a prosperous India. Thank you. Officer-like qualities, OLQs, Defense Industrial Corridors in India. 1. Introduction and Overview. Good morning, respected GTO and my dear friends. Today, the topic of my lecturette is Defense Industrial Corridors in India. For decades, India retained the undesirable title of being one of the world's largest importers of military hardware. To reverse this dependency and fuel the vision of Atmanirbhar Bharat, self-reliant India, the Government of India announced the creation of 2 dedicated Defense Industrial Corridors, DICs, during the 2018-19 Union Budget. A defense corridor is a strategically mapped route or region designed to cluster domestic defense manufacturing units, public sector undertakings, DPSUs, private industries, and MSMEs. Their primary objective is to build an indigenous ecosystem capable of designing, developing, and exporting world-class military equipment. 2. The 2 strategic corridors. India's strategy relies on 2 geographically distinct hubs to power this ecosystem. The Uttar Pradesh Defense Industrial Corridor, UPDIC, spearheaded by UPEIDA, this corridor spans 6 strategic nodes across the state: Kanpur, Jhansi, Lucknow, Aligarh, Agra, and Chitrakoot. It leverages UP's expanding expressway network and industrial base, attracting nearly 40,000 crore rupees in total investment proposals. The Tamil Nadu Defense Industrial Corridor, TNDIC, spanning 5 nodes: Chennai, Coimbatore, Hosur, Salem, and Tiruchirappalli. This corridor leverages Tamil Nadu's existing dominance in the automobile, precision engineering, and manufacturing sectors. 3. Real examples and recent ground progress. The corridors have successfully transitioned from mere policy text into active manufacturing hubs, marked by significant anchor investments, ammunition and small arms. Adani Defense Systems has operationalized a mega 1,500 crore rupees ammunition facility in Kanpur, the largest private sector ammunition hub in South Asia. Additionally, firms like Verivan Defense have commenced manufacturing small arms in the Aligarh node. Aerospace and Missiles. BrahMos Aerospace has set up its 300 crore rupees facility in Lucknow for the production and assembly of the next-generation BrahMos NG missile systems. Nearby, Aeroloy Technologies has launched advanced titanium casting operations for aerospace applications. Testing infrastructure. Under the Defense Testing Infrastructure Scheme, DTIS, a military-grade unmanned aerial systems, UAS, drone testing facility has been established at the IIT Kanpur campus, lowering the entry barrier for aerospace startups. 4. Misuse, bottlenecks, and critical challenges. To present a realistic analysis, we must recognize that setting up high-tech industrial hubs comes with distinct operational hurdles: bureaucracy and land acquisition friction. Acquiring contiguous, litigation-free land remains a challenge. While UPDIC has successfully allotted over 1,100 hectares, slower land consolidation in dense corridors can stall initial foreign investments. The assembly hub trap, misuse of the ecosystem. There is a risk of domestic private entities setting up factories merely to import foreign subcomponents, assemble them locally, and tag them as made in India. This skews indigenous content data without transferring core foundational technologies. MSME integration and credit crunch. Small-scale industries struggle to match the high capital, long gestation demands of defense production. Without handholding, the corridors risk becoming dominated entirely by large conglomerates, starving the lower tiers of the supply chain. 5. Way forward and correct utilization. To fully exploit the potential of these corridors, India must pivot toward high-value technology and integration, focus on anchor supplier ecosystems. Large defense anchors, like BrahMos or Bharat Dynamics, must actively nurture localized MSME supply chains within their respective nodes, such as Jhansi or Chitrakoot, to build resilient supply networks. Synergy with academia. Establish direct pipelines between regional premier institutions, like IIT Kanpur or IIT Madras, and the defense nodes. This ensures that academic R&D translates directly into field-ready military tech. Streamlining single-window clearances. Implement flawless bureaucratic integration. Portals like UP's Nivesh Mitra must guarantee rapid industrial licensing, environmental testing clearances, and explosive licenses to maintain investor momentum. 6. Conclusion. To conclude, defense industrial corridors are not just manufacturing projects, they are the pillars of India's strategic autonomy. With India's defense exports reaching an all-time high of over 38,000 crore rupees, these corridors are successfully turning India from a weapon importer into a global defense exporter. By backing these hubs with swift execution and robust R&D, we ensure that the Indian Armed Forces fight future wars with weapons forged on our own soil. Thank you. Officer-like qualities, OLQ. Militarization, opportunity or threat? 1. Introduction and overview. Good morning, GTO and my friends. Today, I will speak on space militarization, opportunity or threat? Space was once considered a peaceful scientific frontier, defined by the Outer Space Treaty of 1967. However, in the 21st century, space has evolved into the ultimate, high ground, and the fourth domain of warfare. Space militarization refers to the deployment of space-based assets, such as military communication, reconnaissance satellites, and early warning systems, for defense operations. 2. Opportunity versus threat matrix. The opportunity, strategic shield, space assets dramatically enhance a nation's defense matrix. Satellite constellations provide real-time battlefield situational awareness, unjammable military communications, precise GPS navigation for cruise missiles, and ballistic missile early warnings. The threat, weaponization risks. The danger arises when militarization crosses into weaponization, the deployment of kinetic anti-satellite (ASAT) weapons, directed energy lasers, and orbital bombardment systems. This creates a highly volatile environment where a single strike can blind a nuclear-armed nation, leading to catastrophic miscalculations. 3. Real examples and successes. Mission Shakti, 2019, India successfully demonstrated its kinetic ASAT capability, destroying a live satellite in low Earth orbit, LEO, joining the US, Russia, and China. Space Forces. The creation of the US Space Force and India's Defense Space Agency, DSA, demonstrates that nations are formally preparing to defend their orbital sovereignty. 4. Misuse, bottlenecks, and challenges. Kessler Syndrome. The unchecked destruction of satellites creates millions of pieces of high-velocity space debris, risking a domino effect that could render critical orbits completely unusable for civilian communication. Lack of global regulation. Current international laws are toothless against gray zone warfare in space, such as cyber jamming or blinding sensors using ground-based lasers. 5. Way forward and conclusion. In conclusion, while space assets are an indispensable opportunity for national security, aggressive weaponization is an existential threat to humanity. India must champion an international, legally binding, no first placement of weapons in outer space while maintaining robust defensive and deterrent space capabilities. Space must remain a highway for global progress, not a launchpad for planetary conflict. Thank you. Topic 9. Artificial Intelligence in Battlefield Decision-Making. 6. Introduction and Overview. Good morning, everyone. Today, my topic is Artificial Intelligence in Battlefield Decision-Making. Modern warfare is defined by hypervelocity operations where data arrives in floods. Human cognitive limits are pushed to the brink. AI acts as a force multiplier by processing petabytes of sensor data from drones, radars, and cyber networks in milliseconds, providing commanders with actionable, real-time intelligence. 7. Strategic advantages. Sensor-to-shooter speed. AI dramatically compresses the time it takes to detect a target, verify it, and assign a weapon system to neutralize it. Predictive logistics. AI algorithms predict mechanical failures in fighter jets or tanks before they happen, ensuring high operational readiness. Wargaming and simulation. Generative AI models simulate thousands of battlefield scenarios to give commanders the highest probability tactical choices. 8. Real examples and successes. Project Maven, US Department of Defense, uses AI to scan thousands of hours of drone footage to automatically detect and flag insurgent activity. Project Scenic and AI units. The Indian Army has integrated AI-powered target recognition software in its northern borders to automate surveillance and detect cross-border infiltrations through dense camouflage. 9. Misuse, bottlenecks, and challenges. The black box problem and ethical risks. Deep learning AI models cannot explain why they reached a certain conclusion. If an AI misidentifies a civilian vehicle as a military threat, the ethical accountability becomes blurred. Data poisoning and cyber attacks. Adversaries can hack the training data of military AI, causing autonomous systems to fail predictably during critical operations. 10. Way forward and conclusion. To wrap up, AI is an inescapable evolution of warfare. However, the golden rule must always be, human in the loop. AI should advise, but the final ethical decision to pull the trigger must remain human. India must rapidly invest in military AI research while ensuring strict ethical protocols to prevent catastrophic, machine-led escalation. Thank you. Topic 10. India's Semiconductor Mission, ISM. 11. Introduction and Overview. Good morning, GTO and friends. Today, I am going to throw light on India's semiconductor mission. Silicon chips are the oil of the 21st century. They power everything from your smartphones and electric vehicles to advanced cruise missiles and fighter jet radars. Launched with an outlay of 76,000 crore rupees, the India Semiconductor Mission aims to build a robust domestic chip fabrication, design, and packaging ecosystem. 12. Strategic objectives and economic impact. Geopolitical sovereignty. Currently, global chip supply chains are heavily concentrated in Taiwan and South Korea, a major vulnerability given regional geopolitical flashpoints. Developing domestic fabs shields India from global supply shocks. Economic growth. The global semiconductor market is racing toward $1 trillion. ISM acts as an economic multiplier, generating high-tech employment and anchoring advanced electronics manufacturing within the country. 13. Real examples and successes. ISM 2.0 and mega plants. Following the foundational gains of ISM 1.0, the government rolled out ISM 2.0 with enhanced outlays. Major milestones include Micron Technologies' advanced packaging facility starting production in Sanand, Gujarat, alongside mega fabrication plants approved for Tata Electronics in Dhora and CG Power. Indigenous processors. CDAC successfully developed Dhruv 64, a fully indigenous 64-bit microprocessor designed for 5G infrastructure and industrial automation, showcasing India's chip design maturity. 14. Misuse, bottlenecks, and challenges. High resource dependency. Chip fabrication requires billions of gallons of ultra-pure water and an uninterrupted, fluctuate-free power supply. Managing these resources in water-stressed regions is a major challenge. Talent brain drain. While India possesses excellent chip design talent, contributing to 20% of the world's engineers, most work for foreign multinationals. Reorienting them toward domestic IP creation requires massive ecosystem shifts. 15. Way forward and conclusion. To conclude, the India Semiconductor Mission is a long-term strategic chess move. By expanding fiscal support under ISM 2.0 to advance 3D packaging and sub-5 nanometers nodes, and partnering with academic hubs like the IITs for specialized talent, India will secure its place as a trusted, resilient pillar in the global technology supply chain. Thank you. Topic 11. Cybersecurity as the fifth dimension of warfare. 16. Introduction and overview. Good morning, gentlemen. The topic of my lecturette is cybersecurity as the fifth dimension of warfare. Historically, wars were fought across land, sea, and air. The late 20th century added space. Today, the fifth domain, cyberspace, has emerged as the most lethal, invisible, and asymmetric battlefield. Unlike conventional warfare, cyber operations require no physical troops, cross borders at the speed of light, and can cripple a nation's critical infrastructure without firing a single bullet. 17. Strategic impact and threat landscape. Asymmetric advantage. A rogue state or non-state actor with limited resources can leverage malicious software to paralyze a superpower's banking system, satellite networks, or intelligence databases. Attribution dilemma. Cyber attacks are shielded by plausible deniability. Determining the true origin of a state-sponsored hack takes weeks, severely complicating traditional military deterrence. 18. Real examples and successes. Stuxnet worm. A classic historical example where a cyber weapon physically destroyed Iranian nuclear centrifuges by altering their rotor speeds. Kudankulam cyber incident, 2019. India's Kudankulam nuclear power plant suffered a malware infection on its administrative network, highlighting vulnerabilities in critical infrastructure. Defense Cyber Agency, DCYA, India established this tri-service command to actively mitigate external state-sponsored cyber threats targeting the armed forces. 19. Misuse, misconceptions, and challenges. Weaponization of ransomware. Criminal syndicates are routinely used as geopolitical proxies by hostile nations to extort money and leak sensitive government credentials. Lack of digital hygiene. The biggest vulnerability in any advanced cyber defense is not the software, but human error. Phishing links clicked by internal staff expose highly classified military domains. 20. Way forward and conclusion. To conclude, in the modern era, losing the cyber war means losing the physical war before it even begins. India must rapidly transition from reactive firewalls to proactive cyber hunting, enforce indigenous hardware security standards, and mandate strict digital protocols across civilian and military sectors. Cyber resilience is the ultimate cornerstone of 21st century national security. Thank you. Topic 12. Water security and India's future. 21. Introduction and overview. Good morning, respected GTO and friends. Today, I will speak on water security and India's future. India is home to nearly 18% of the global human population but possesses only 4% of the world's renewable water resources. As climate change accelerates and urbanization expands, water security is shifting from a purely environmental challenge into a profound national security threat. 22. The multi-dimensional crisis. Geopolitical flashpoints, hydropolitics, India's major river systems are shared internationally. China's construction of mega dams on the upper reaches of the Brahmaputra, Yaling Sangpo, gives Beijing the power to trigger sudden floods or artificial droughts in India's northeast. Westward, the Indus Waters Treaty requires constant diplomatic vigilance. Domestic discontent. Depleting groundwater tables across agricultural breadbaskets like Punjab and Haryana risk severe food insecurity, while interstate disputes, like the Kaveri water dispute, strain internal federal stability. 23. Real examples and government initiatives. Jal Jeevan Mission, a massive nationwide push providing functional tap water connections to over 75% of rural households, significantly improving public health and rural productivity. Amrit Sarovar Mission, an excellent local-level initiative focused on constructing or rejuvenating 75 water bodies in every district across India to recharge depleting ground aquifers. 24. Misuse and mismanagement of resources. Flawed agricultural incentives. The provision of free or heavily subsidized electricity leads to reckless, uncontrolled pumping of groundwater. Growing water-intensive crops like rice and sugarcane in naturally arid regions is a catastrophic ecological misuse. Industrial pollution. Dumping untreated chemical effluents directly into vital lifelines like the Ganga and Yamuna severely depletes the remaining consumable water supply. 25. Way forward and conclusion. In summary, the next global and regional conflicts will be fought over water, not oil. India must pivot toward large-scale micro-irrigation, drip and sprinkler farming, strictly enforce industrial zero liquid discharge norms, and adopt water harvesting as a citizen-led movement. Securing our water is non-negotiable for building a self-reliant future. Thank you. Topic 13. India's role in the Indo-Pacific region. 26. Introduction and overview. Good morning, everyone. Today, my topic is India's role in the Indo-Pacific region. The Indo-Pacific has emerged as the global economic and geopolitical center of gravity, accounting for over 60% of global GDP and 50% of maritime trade. India, sitting strategically at the crossroads of the Indian Ocean, has transitioned from being a passive regional balancing power to a proactive net security provider in this crucial theater. 27. Strategic imperatives and leadership roles. Sagar Vision, standing for security and growth for all in the region, this framework defines India's cooperative approach, focusing on maritime capacity building, disaster relief, HADR operations, and counter-piracy. Counterbalancing assertiveness. India plays a pivotal role in ensuring that the vital sea lines of communication, SLOCs, remain free from coercive, unilateral hegemony, particularly in the South China Sea. 28. Real examples and successes. The Quad Framework. India's active engagement alongside the US, Japan, and Australia to deliver tangible public goods, such as vaccine distribution, maritime domain awareness, and climate resilience. Logistics agreements. Signing reciprocal military logistics sharing pacts, like LEMOA with the US and similar deals with Japan, Australia, and France, enables the Indian Navy to extend its operational reach across the entire theater. Strategic export. Delivering the BrahMos missile system to the Philippines acts as a concrete example of India helping regional partners protect their maritime boundaries. 29. Misuse and challenges. Continental versus maritime dilemma. India faces a persistent challenge in balancing its defense spending between its active, tense land borders, line of actual control and line of control, and the long-term capital demands of building an expansive blue water navy. The ASEAN centrality, balance. Over-militarization of the region risks alienating smaller Southeast Asian nations who fear being caught in a superpower crossfire. India must ensure its strategic moves remain highly collaborative. 30. Way forward and conclusion. To conclude, the Indo-Pacific's future will shape India's destiny as a global power. India must continue accelerating its naval modernization, expanding port infrastructure partnerships like Sabang in Indonesia, and driving robust trade networks. By ensuring a free, open, and rules-based Indo-Pacific, India secures both its economic path and global status. Thank you. Topic is style for quick scanning, rapid memorization, and structured delivery in front of the GTO. Topic 14, National Education Policy, NEP, 2020 and Nation Building. 1. Introduction and Overview. Good morning, GTO and friends. The topic for my lecturette is National Education Policy, NEP, 2020 and Nation Building. A nation's human capital is its greatest asset. Replacing the outdated 1986 education framework, NEP 2020 acts as a structural blueprint designed to transform India's rote learning system into a modern, skill-oriented, and holistic ecosystem fit for the 21st century. 2. Pillars of Transformation. The 5+3+3+4 structure, re-architecting the school timeline to prioritize early childhood care and education, ECE, ensuring cognitive development begins systematically at age 3. Multidisciplinary and flexible higher education, breaking down rigid silos between science, commerce, and arts. A student can now pursue physics alongside classical music, backed by a flexible academic bank of credits, ABC, for multiple entry and exit options. Vocational integration, introducing coding, carpentry, and digital skills from class 6 onward to systematically eliminate the deep-seated social stigma surrounding vocational labor. 3. Real examples and successes. PM Shri Schools. The government has upgraded thousands of schools across the nation to serve as model laboratories demonstrating the tech-driven, experiential curriculum of NEP 2020. Internationalization. Top-tier foreign universities, like Deakin and Wollongong, establishing campuses in India's gift city, preventing domestic brain drain and raising domestic academic benchmarks. 4. Bottlenecks and practical challenges. The digital and infrastructure divide. Implementing high-tech smart classrooms and experiential toolkits in undefended rural schools remains a steep operational challenge. Teacher upskilling. Transitioning millions of teachers away from conventional, textbook-reliant rote methods requires massive, continuous training investments. Linguistic implementation friction. Prioritizing primary education in mother tongues is cognitively beneficial but faces logistical hurdles regarding curriculum translation and interstate migration. 5. Way forward and conclusion. In conclusion, NEP 2020 is a visionary document, but its success hinges entirely on execution at the grassroots level. States and the center must collaborate to raise education spending toward the targeted 6% of GDP. By building a creative, highly skilled, and rooted generation, NEP 2020 will serve as the definitive catalyst for achieving Viksit Bharat. Thank you. Topic 15, One Nation, One Election, ONOE, Prospects and Challenges. 6. Introduction and Overview. Good morning, everyone. Today, I will speak on the highly debated electoral reform, One Nation, One Election. ONOE proposes synchronizing the schedules of the Lok Sabha elections, state legislative assemblies, and local bodies so that voting across India happens within a unified, phased window. India held simultaneous elections until 1967, after which the premature dissolution of assemblies broke the cycle. 7. The prospects, the benefits, curtailing immense financial loss. Holding separate elections constantly drains the national exchequer. Expert panels indicate that synchronized national and state elections could generate massive economic savings, potentially saving up to 7 lakh rupees crore that could instead fund long-term infrastructure. Ending policy paralysis. Continuous elections trigger the frequent imposition of the Model Code of Conduct, MCC. This halts the announcement of new developmental projects, welfare schemes, and administrative decisions for months on end. Governance continuity. It frees up thousands of security personnel and government teachers from perpetual election duties, allowing them to focus on national security and education. 8. Real examples and recent policy steps. Kovind Committee Report. A high-level committee led by former President Ram Nath Kovind thoroughly analyzed the framework, recommending a phased implementation starting with Lok Sabha and Assembly Sync. Joint Parliamentary Committee. Active parliamentary panels are refining the legal mechanisms, such as the 129th Constitutional Amendment Bill, with a clear roadmap to make simultaneous elections fully operational by the 2029 general elections. 9. Practical challenges and federal concerns. Constitutional amendments. Implementing ONOE requires amending multiple articles of the Constitution, Articles 83, 85, 172, 174, and securing ratification from at least half the states, requiring deep political consensus. The premature collapse dilemma. If a state government falls due to a no-confidence motion or coalition collapse in year 2, handling the remaining 3 years without breaking the national synchronization cycle remains a complex puzzle. Overshadowing regional issues. Critics argue that simultaneous voting might lead national narratives to completely swallow localized, state-specific issues, potentially disadvantaging regional political parties. 10. Way forward and conclusion. To summarize, ONOE is a monumental structural reform that can transition India from perpetual election mode to uninterrupted development mode. To address the federal challenge, India could adopt the German model of a constructive vote of no confidence, where a government cannot be dismissed unless an alternative majority leader is simultaneously elected. A synchronized democracy will pave the way for a highly stable and prosperous nation. Thank you. Topic 16. India's aspirations for a UN Security Council permanent seat. 11. Introduction and overview. Good morning, gentlemen. Today, I am going to speak on India's aspirations for a permanent seat in the United Nations Security Council, UNSC. The UNSC is the apex global body responsible for maintaining international peace and security. However, its current permanent structure, the P5, US, UK, France, Russia, China, reflects the geopolitical reality of 1945, the immediate aftermath of World War II. Today, this structure is outdated, unrepresentative, and paralyzed by geopolitical vetoes. 12. The core arguments justifying India's case. Demographic and economic weight. India is the world's most populous nation and the fastest growing major economy. Excluding a fifth of humanity from permanent global decision-making severely damages the UN's institutional legitimacy. Unmatched peacekeeping credentials. India is historically one of the largest cumulative contributors of troops to UN peacekeeping operations worldwide, having sacrificed the highest number of peacekeepers in the line of duty. A responsible nuclear power. India maintains a clean non-proliferation record, backed by a credible, no-first-use doctrine, proving its status as a highly responsible global actor. 13. Real examples and diplomatic triumphs. Voice of the Global South. During its G20 presidency, India successfully championed the inclusion of the African Union as a permanent member, demonstrating its ability to democratize global governance. Broad bilateral endorsement. 4 out of the 5 current permanent members, US, UK, France, Russia, have explicitly and repeatedly backed India's bid for a permanent seat. 14. Major obstacles and strategic bottlenecks. The Chinese veto. China remains the primary structural obstacle, using its veto power to systematically block consensus on UNSC expansion under the pretext of needing a comprehensive solution. The Uniting for Consensus (UFC) bloc, regional rivals, like Pakistan, alongside Italy and Mexico, form the Coffee Club, actively lobbying against adding new permanent members to prevent their regional peers from gaining asymmetric diplomatic strength. 15. Way forward and conclusion. To conclude, a UNSC without India is not a reflection of the modern world, it is a historical anachronism. While continuing to push for text-based negotiations within the UN, India must simultaneously strengthen unilateral groupings like the Quad, BRICS, and IBSA. By expanding our economic and defense footprints globally, India will eventually make its entry into the permanent high table, an inevitability that the world cannot ignore. Thank you. Topic 17. Strategic importance of the Arctic region. 16. Introduction and overview. Good morning, GTO and friends. The topic for my lecturette is the strategic importance of the Arctic region. Historically an inaccessible expanse of thick ice, accelerated global warming has transformed the Arctic into a hyper-strategic arena. The rapid melting of polar ice caps is opening up lucrative new global trade routes and unlocking access to massive, previously unreachable natural resource reserves. 17. Geopolitical and economic dimensions. The resource goldmine, the Arctic seabed is estimated to contain nearly 13% of the world's undiscovered oil and 30% of its undiscovered natural gas, alongside vast reserves of critical rare earth minerals. Revolutionary shipping routes. The opening of the Northern Sea Route, NSR, cuts maritime transit time between Europe and Asia by up to 40% compared to the traditional route through the Suez Canal, bypassing global choke points like the Strait of Malacca. Militarization trends. Russia and NATO are rapidly expanding their military infrastructure in the region, constructing deep-water polar ports and deploying icebreaker fleets, making the Arctic a potential future conflict zone. 18. Real examples and India's footprint. India's Arctic policy. India unveiled its formal Arctic policy, focusing on scientific research, climate monitoring, and economic cooperation. Himadri Station. India operates its dedicated permanent Arctic research base, Himadri, at Spitsbergen, Svalbard, focusing on studying the direct links between Arctic ice melt and the variations in the Indian monsoon. Arctic Council status. India has successfully maintained its observer status in the Arctic Council, ensuring a seat at the diplomatic table. 19. Environmental threat and risks. Ecological fragility. Reckless commercial drilling and heavy cargo shipping risk catastrophic oil spills in an environment where cleanup is nearly impossible due to extreme freezing conditions. Feedback loop. The loss of Arctic albedo, white ice reflecting sunlight, accelerates global warming, directly threatening low-lying coastal cities across India with rising sea levels. 20. Way forward and conclusion. In conclusion, the Arctic is no longer a distant polar ice sheet. It is a critical driver of future global geopolitics and climate safety. India must deepen its scientific research capabilities, secure sustainable investment partnerships in the Northern Sea Route, and advocate for an international governance model that prioritizes eco-preservation over militarization. Thank you. Topic 18. India's Defence Space Agency, DSA, and Future Challenges. 21. Introduction and Overview. Good morning, everyone. Today, I will speak on India's Defence Space Agency and future challenges. Modern warfare has firmly extended beyond the atmosphere. With modern military units heavily relying on space assets for satellite communication, navigation, and missile targeting, protecting our orbital assets is paramount. Established in 2019 as a tri-service agency, the DSA is tasked with safeguarding India's space assets and command infrastructure from hostile counter-space capabilities. 22. Mandate and strategic necessity. Space domain awareness, monitoring all space objects, tracking active debris, and detecting hostile maneuverable satellites that approach Indian surveillance constellations. Tri-service integration, synthesizing the space requirements of the Army, Navy, and Air Force into a unified operational command, avoiding redundant expenditures and fragmented intelligence. 23. Real examples and capabilities. Space exercises, SpaceX. The DSA routinely conducts simulated space warfare exercises to stress test the resilience of India's command networks against simulated satellite blackouts. Integration with ISRO. The DSA coordinates directly with ISRO to utilize dedicated military satellites like the GSAT-7 series, Navy and Air Force, for secure, real-time communications across deep maritime and border zones. 24. Future challenges and threats. The directed energy and cyber threat. Adversaries are focusing on non-kinetic methods, such as ground-based high-energy lasers to blind satellite optics or electronic jamming to disrupt communication feeds. High-technology import dependency. While India is a master of launch vehicles, it still relies on foreign imports for specialized, radiation-hardened components required for long-endurance military satellites. Asymmetric capabilities. China possesses advanced co-orbital robotic arms capable of physically grabbing and displacing satellites from their designated orbits, demanding rapid defensive innovations from India. 25. Way forward and conclusion. To summarize, the Defence Space Agency is the vanguard of India's outer space sovereignty. To match escalating global capabilities, the DSA must eventually mature into a full-fledged, independent space command. By nurturing domestic space tech startups and developing robust electronic countermeasures, India will ensure its armed forces retain their vital eyes and ears in the sky. Thank you. Topic 19. Border Infrastructure and National Security. 26. Introduction and Overview. Good morning, GTO and friends. The topic of my lecturette is Border Infrastructure and National Security. Historically, India maintained a conservative policy of leaving its northern borders underdeveloped to act as a natural terrain barrier against invasion. However, the modern security landscape requires immediate, high-speed troop mobility and logistical permanence. Developing robust roads, tunnels, and strategic airfields along our borders is a foundational pillar of modern national defense. 27. Strategic advantages and operational readiness. Rapid troop mobilization. High-quality lateral roads allow the Indian Armed Forces to rapidly shift troops and heavy artillery, like M777 howitzers and tanks, to flashpoints within hours, rather than days. All-weather connectivity. Cutting-edge mountain tunnels ensure that vital supply chains to strategic zones like Ladakh and Arunachal Pradesh remain completely open through harsh winter snows. Grassroots border stabilization. Developing border villages with electricity, digital connectivity, and hospitals prevents local migration, ensuring our border populations remain our primary eyes and ears on the ground. 28. Real examples and direct triumphs. The Border Roads Organization, BRO. The BRO has delivered iconic strategic projects, including the Atal Tunnel, Rohtang, and the highly strategic Sela Tunnel in Arunachal Pradesh, drastically shortening transit times to the line of actual control, LAC. Vibrant Villages Program. A dedicated national initiative transforming remote border hamlets into well-connected hubs to counter China's establishment of Shaokeng, dual-use border villages. Advanced Landing Grounds, ALGs, the operationalization of strategic airfields like Nyoma in eastern Ladakh, capable of handling heavy military transport aircraft right next to the border. 29. Bottlenecks and environmental risks. Fragile Himalayan geology. Heavy blasting and unscientific road cutting in young, active mountain ranges frequently trigger severe landslides and flash floods, demanding advanced green engineering alternatives. Extreme weather windows. Heavy winter snowfalls and torrential summer monsoons leave engineers with short, highly challenging construction windows each year. 30. Way forward and conclusion. In conclusion, the security of a nation begins where its borders are anchored. India's aggressive pivot toward upgrading border infrastructure has effectively leveled the strategic playing field along the LAC. By combining eco-resilient engineering with accelerated project execution, we ensure that our frontline troops are backed by unbreakable steel logistics. Thank you.
Topic 8. Space militarization. Opportunity or threat? Topic 20. India's transition towards green energy 1. Introduction and overview. Good morning, everyone. Today I will speak on India's transition towards green energy. India is the world's third largest consumer of energy, with its demand poised to explode as economic growth accelerates. However, relying on fossil fuel imports threatens both our fiscal health and the environment. India's aggressive transition toward renewable energy is an absolute economic and strategic imperative. 2. Strategic goals and pillars of transition. Panchamrit targets. Announced at COP26, India committed to reaching 500 gigawatts of non-fossil energy capacity and meeting 50% of its energy requirements from renewable sources, marching toward a net zero carbon emission target. Energy independence. Reducing India's massive multi-billion-dollar crude oil import bill insulates the domestic economy from volatile Middle Eastern and global geopolitical shocks. 3. Real examples and successes. International Solar Alliance, ISA. India co-founded this global platform, positioning itself as a leader in global solar deployment. National Green Hydrogen Mission, backed by a 19,700 crore rupees outlay, this initiative aims to turn India into a global exporter of green hydrogen, decarbonizing heavy industries like steel and refineries. Mega solar parks. The operationalization of the Bhadla Solar Park in Rajasthan, spanning thousands of acres as one of the largest single-site solar installations in the world. 4. Misuse, bottlenecks, and challenges. Grid stability and intermittency. Solar and wind energy are inherently dependent on weather conditions. Without advanced grid-scale battery storage infrastructure, relying on renewables can trigger severe power grid instabilities. Critical mineral dependency. Manufacturing solar panels and electric vehicle batteries requires vast amounts of lithium, cobalt, and nickel. Currently, the supply chains for these critical minerals are heavily controlled by China, creating a new geopolitical dependency risk. 5. Way forward and conclusion. To conclude, India's green energy transition is a masterclass in combining climate responsibility with national self-reliance. To ensure long-term success, India must invest heavily in domestic battery manufacturing through PLI schemes and rapidly expand nuclear and pumped hydro storage capacities. A green India is a secure, self-reliant India. Thank you. Topic 21. Role of Youth in Viksit Bharat 2047. 1. Introduction. Role of Youth in Viksit Bharat 2047. 1. Introduction and overview. Good morning, GTO and friends. Today, my topic is the role of youth in Viksit Bharat 2047. The year 2047 will mark the centenary of India's independence, the target date for India to transform into a fully developed nation. With over 65% of its population below the age of 35, India possesses a massive, unparalleled demographic dividend that no other major global economy can match. The energy, innovation, and leadership of this youth cohort will determine whether India realizes its developed nation status. 2. Strategic spheres of impact. The startup and innovation economy, the youth, are transitioning India away from conventional corporate job seeking toward high-value job creation, spearheading breakthroughs in AI, fintech, defense tech, and space exploration. Social and civic transformation. Armed with digital connectivity, modern youth are actively dismantling archaic social barriers, driving financial literacy at the grassroots, and demanding transparent governance. Global representation. From international sports arenas to global technology conglomerates, Indian youth are projecting the nation's soft power and intellectual leadership globally. 3. Real examples and successes. Thriving startup ecosystem. India has grown to host the world's third-largest startup ecosystem, powered almost entirely by young entrepreneurs under 40. Youth and nation-building platforms. Initiatives like the National Youth Parliament Festival and Digital India Hackathons actively channel youthful intellect directly into resolving complex governance bottlenecks. 4. Challenges and potential misuse of demographic assets. The skill mismatch crisis. A large segment of graduating youth possesses formal degrees but lacks industry-ready technical skills, risking turning the demographic dividend into a demographic liability if unaddressed. Digital distraction and misinformation. Access to cheap data can be a double-edged sword. Unregulated exposure to deepfakes, online radicalization, and echo chambers can misdirect youthful energy into social polarization. 5. Way forward and conclusion. To conclude, the youth are not just the future of India. They are the active architects of its present. To successfully achieve Viksit Bharat, the nation must bridge the skill gap through vocational training, foster a deep culture of scientific research, and nurture ethical leadership traits. When the youth resolve to lead with character, India's rise becomes unstoppable. Thank you. Topic 23. India as a global defense manufacturing hub. 1. Introduction and overview. Good morning, respected GTO and friends. Today I will speak on India as a global defense manufacturing hub. Historically, India stood as one of the world's largest defense importers, leaving our security vulnerable to foreign diplomatic shifts and supply line blockades. Today, through targeted reforms under Atmanirbhar Bharat, India has executed a profound paradigm shift, rapidly building a robust domestic defense industrial complex capable of supplying both our armed forces and international partners. 2. Drivers of strategic transformation. Positive indigenization lists. The Ministry of Defense has mandated import embargoes on thousands of military subsystems, forcing domestic defense PSUs and private players to design and manufacture components locally. Corporatization of OFB. Transforming the archaic Ordnance Factory Board into 7 corporate entities has significantly boosted manufacturing efficiency, accountability, and product quality. 3. Real examples and historic milestones. Record exports. In the recent financial year, India's defense exports skyrocketed to an all-time high of 38,424 crore rupees, marking a phenomenal 62% surge over the previous fiscal, with Indian armaments reaching more than 80 countries. Flagship hardware. Successful global exports of high-value systems, including the BrahMos supersonic cruise missile to the Philippines, the Akash air defense missile system to Armenia, and Pinaka multi-barrel rocket launchers to international partners. Indigenous platforms. The induction of the homegrown INS Vikrant aircraft carrier and the advanced Tejas light combat aircraft into active frontline service. 4. Bottlenecks and strategic obstacles. Low private sector R&D investment. While the private sector contributes around 45% of exports, the creation of foundational intellectual property is still heavily driven by the government's DRDO laboratories. Private conglomerates must transition from mere manufacturing to deep technological design. Critical raw material gaps. India still faces dependencies on specialized aerospace-grade titanium and carbon fiber alloys, leaving initial supply links exposed to foreign variables. 5. Way forward and conclusion. To summarize, transforming into a global defense manufacturing hub is the ultimate guarantee of India's strategic autonomy. By expanding the defense PLI schemes, establishing more testing infrastructure within our twin defense corridors, and maintaining our export momentum, India will cement its position as a reliable global security exporter. Thank you. Topic 24. National Logistics Policy, NLP, and Economic Growth. 1. Introduction and Overview. Good morning, everyone. The topic for my lecturette is the National Logistics Policy and Economic Growth. Logistics is the unseen circulatory system of any economy. Historically, India's logistics costs stood high at approximately 13 to 14% of its GDP, compared to the 7 to 8% benchmark seen in advanced economies like Germany and the US. This disparity made Indian exports less competitive globally. Launched to rectify this systemic drag, the NLP aims to slash logistics costs, optimize supply chain speeds, and boost overall economic efficiency. 2. Core pillars of the reform, ULIP, Unified Logistics Interface Platform, integrating data from multiple ministries, shipping, aviation, railways, customs, into a single digital window, eliminating tedious paperwork and reducing administrative delays. Multimodal integration, seamlessly linking highways with inland waterways and dedicated freight corridors, ensuring cargo moves via the most cost-effective transportation medium. 3. Real examples and infrastructure synergy, PM Gati Shakti National Master Plan, the overarching digital GIS mapping tool that ensures various infrastructure ministries coordinate planning beforehand, preventing situations where a newly built road is dug up to lay telecom cables. Dedicated freight corridors, DFCs. The operationalization of the eastern and western DFCs has successfully doubled the average speed of freight trains, ensuring swift cargo movement to critical ports. 4. Practical challenges and bottlenecks. Fragmented last-mile connectivity. While national highways are world-class, the local roads connecting remote industrial units or agricultural hubs to major freeways remain slow and prone to congestion. High digital resistance. Transitioning millions of small-scale, unorganized truck operators and warehouse managers onto integrated digital tracking platforms requires sustained grassroots training and incentives. 5. Way forward and conclusion. In conclusion, the national logistics policy is an essential economic game-changer. By successfully reducing logistics costs down towards single digits, India will dramatically boost its manufacturing competitiveness, attract massive foreign direct investments, and accelerate its march toward a multi-trillion-dollar economy. Thank you. Topic 25. Drone swarms and the future of warfare. 1. Introduction and overview. Good morning, GTO and friends. Today I am going to speak on drone swarms and the future of warfare. The battlefield is undergoing a profound robotic revolution. Conventional warfare relied on large, expensive, manned platforms like fighter jets and tanks. Today, drone swarm technology leverages artificial intelligence to network dozens of low-cost, autonomous, unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, into a collective mind, capable of overwhelming advanced air defenses through sheer mass and coordinated tactical execution. 2. Tactical advantages and lethality. Overwhelming saturation. Traditional air defense radars are calibrated to track large, fast targets. A simultaneous swarm of 50 microdrones confuses radar networks, bleeding their ammunition reserves and neutralizing critical defenses at low cost. Distributed intelligence. If an adversary shoots down 5 drones out of a 40-drone swarm, the remaining 35 automatically reconfigure their network positions in real time to complete the target reconnaissance or kamikaze strike without human intervention. Minimizing human casualties. Swarms can execute high-risk suppression of enemy air defenses, SEAD operations, keeping manned aircraft and pilots out of dangerous engagement zones. 3. Real examples and successes. The conflict footprint. Modern conflicts globally have demonstrated the devastating effectiveness of low-cost loitering munitions and organized FPV drone attacks against heavy, armor-plated tanks. Indian Army induction. The Indian Army has successfully inducted indigenous drone swarms capable of executing autonomous target recognition and precision strikes, deployed along our high-altitude northern borders. 4. Vulnerabilities, misuse, and counters. Electronic warfare exposure. Drone swarms rely heavily on secure inter-drone communication links and GPS signals. High-powered military jammers can disrupt these frequencies, causing the swarm to lose cohesion. Asymmetric non-state actor threat. The technology is relatively cheap and easily accessible. Rogue organizations can weaponize commercial off-the-shelf drones with small explosives, threatening vital civilian installations and VIP security. 5. Way forward and conclusion. To conclude, drone swarms are redefining tactical military paradigms. India must continue aggressively backing domestic defense startups to build advanced algorithms that resist electronic jamming, while simultaneously deploying robust counter-drone kinetic and laser systems. Staying ahead of this technological curve is non-negotiable for modern national security. Thank you. Topic 26. Balancing economic development with environmental conservation. 1. Introduction and overview. Good morning, respected GTO and friends. Today I will address one of the greatest global and national dilemmas, balancing economic development with environmental conservation. To lift millions out of poverty and build vital infrastructure, a developing nation like India requires rapid industrial expansion. However, pursuing unchecked growth at the cost of environmental degradation triggers catastrophic climate feedbacks, creating an unsustainable loop. True national progress lies in sustainable development, meeting current economic needs without compromising the safety of future generations. 2. The core conflict areas: infrastructure versus ecology. Constructing vital strategic border highways and hydro projects through ecologically fragile zones like the Himalayas can trigger devastating landslides, cloudburst impacts, and structural damages if unguided by eco-inputs. Industrial output versus public health. Running conventional coal-powered plants and heavy manufacturing units drives economic metrics but degrades air and water quality, resulting in massive long-term public healthcare expenditures. 3. Real examples and policy balance. Green bonds and PLI incentives. The government is floating specialized green bonds to raise capital exclusively for eco-friendly infrastructure, while backing EV and battery ecosystems through production-linked incentives. Compensatory afforestation, CAMPA. Enforcing strict mandates where any industrial forest clearance must be legally balanced by continuous, verified afforestation projects elsewhere. 4. Misuse and policy implementation gaps. Greenwashing practices. Certain corporate entities exploit loopholes, packaging standard commercial operations as eco-friendly through superficial branding adjustments without implementing real zero-emission changes. Grassroots enforcement laxity. Environmental impact assessments, EIAs, are occasionally rushed or compromised, allowing heavy real estate or mining setups to encroach onto critical eco-sensitive zones, leading to structural failures. 5. Way forward in conclusion. In summary, economy and ecology are not opposing forces. They are two sides of the same coin. India must strictly enforce green construction codes, transition toward a circular economy that prioritizes recycling, and harness localized green energy networks. By ensuring our development is sustainable, we build a nation that is both economically invincible and ecologically pristine. Thank you. AI hook. Good. Topic 1. Artificial Intelligence. AI hook. Good morning, respected GTO and my dear friends. A machine can look at a million X-rays in a minute and spot a tumor missed by human eyes. Yet, the same machine can be completely fooled by a sticky note pasted on a stop sign. Today, I stand before you to speak on artificial intelligence, the dual-edged catalyst of the 21st century. Background: artificial intelligence refers to the simulation of human intelligence processes by machines, especially computer systems, enabling them to learn, reason, and self-correct. Historically rooted in Alan Turing's work in the 1950s, AI remained restricted by computing power for decades. However, the explosion of big data and advanced neural networks over the past decade has transitioned AI from speculative science fiction into the primary engine of the Fourth Industrial Revolution, $4 IR. Current situation: we are currently living in the era of artificial narrow intelligence, ANI, and experiencing the massive democratization of generative AI, like large language models and advanced computer vision tools. Globally, AI is being integrated into everything from autonomous driving and algorithmic financial trading to smart drug discovery. Nationally, through the India AI mission, the Indian government is heavily funding domestic computing infrastructure, deploying AI for localized agricultural crop monitoring, and using predictive algorithms to optimize public healthcare and welfare delivery systems. Analysis: AI is a massive force multiplier for a developing nation. Economically, it has the potential to add nearly $1 trillion to India's GDP by optimizing manufacturing supply chains and automating administrative services. In terms of national security, AI revolutionizes intelligence processing by parsing through petabytes of satellite imagery and intercepted communications in milliseconds, significantly shortening the sensor-to-shooter timeline. It shifts our capabilities from reactive defense to proactive, predictive security. Challenges: the black box problem and accountability. Deep learning models cannot explain how they reached a specific conclusion, creating legal and ethical blind spots when an autonomous system makes a critical mistake. Data colonialism and bias. AI models are largely trained on Western datasets, embedding cultural and societal biases that can lead to flawed algorithmic decisions when applied to diverse populations. Job displacement versus creation. While it generates high-tech roles, AI threatens to rapidly automate entry-level cognitive tasks, potentially disrupting the employment landscape for large percentages of the educated youth workforce. Way forward: human-in-the-loop architecture, implementing a strict policy where AI acts purely as an analytical advisor, leaving the final ethical decision-making power strictly in human hands. Sovereign data cleanrooms, developing native localized datasets that represent India's linguistic and demographic diversity to build highly objective, domestic AI models. Regulatory guardrails, implementing strict global frameworks to distinguish between benign software applications and hazardous autonomous systems. Conclusion: to conclude, Artificial intelligence is an inescapable technological evolution. It is neither inherently a savior nor a destroyer. It is a mirror reflecting human intent. By driving robust ethical regulations alongside deep local innovations, India can harness AI to achieve strategic autonomy and inclusive development. Thank you. Topic 2. India-China Relations. Hook. Good morning, gentlemen. Two ancient civilizations, sharing a 3,488-kilometer border, home to one-third of humanity, and poised to lead the Asian century, yet locked in a complex chess game of strategic distrust. Today my topic is India-China Relations, the paradox of geopolitical friction and economic interdependence. Background. Historically bound by ancient trade routes and cultural exchanges like Buddhism, modern India-China relations were severely fractured by the 1962 border war. For decades, bilateral relations followed the 1988 consensus brokered by Rajiv Gandhi and Deng Xiaoping, keeping the unresolved boundary issue aside while building trade and diplomatic ties. However, China's aggressive infrastructure building along the line of actual control, lack, and its global geopolitical ambitions systematically dismantled this formula. Current situation. The relationship remains frozen in a state of armed coexistence. While diplomatic talks continue at the NSA and military commander levels to manage the prolonged border standoff, the operational trust deficit is at an all-time high. Despite intense political and military friction, a stark paradox remains. Bilateral trade remains resilient, with India's trade deficit with China hovering around $112 billion, highlighting India's deep reliance on Chinese industrial imports. Analysis. The relationship is defined by structural divergences and minor convergences. Divergences. China's Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, systematically violates Indian sovereignty through the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, CPEC. Furthermore, Beijing's String of Pearls maritime strategy aims to encircle India in the Indian Ocean, while its recurrent use of technical vetoes at the UNSC shields cross-border terrorists targeting India. Convergences. Both nations act as prominent voices for the Global South, sharing common ground within platforms like BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, SCO, when pushing for global financial reforms and climate justice. Challenges. Asymmetric border infrastructure. China's rapid construction of dual-use Shaokang border villages and military logistics hubs gives them a high-speed mobilization advantage along the LAC. Critical supply chain dependency. India remains structurally dependent on China for active pharmaceutical ingredients, APIs, for our pharma sector, alongside critical solar components and electronics hardware. The ocean flashpoint. The increasing entry of Chinese scientific research vessels and nuclear submarines into the Indian Ocean region presents a continuous, gray zone maritime security challenge. Way forward. Strategic economic decoupling and friendshoring. Accelerating India's production-linked incentive, PLI schemes to achieve self-reliance in critical sectors like pharmaceuticals and electronics. Proactive border development, speeding up projects under the Vibrant Villages program alongside the Border Roads Organization, BRO, to match Chinese infrastructural density. Asymmetric maritime deterrence, leveraging minilateral partnerships like the Quad to turn the Indian Ocean choke points, like the Malacca Strait, into strategic counters against Chinese continental pressure. Conclusion. To summarize, India's approach toward China must reject both naive pacifism and alarmist warmongering. Armed, peaceful coexistence, backed by robust military deterrence and economic self-reliance, is the only way forward. India must deal with China from a position of absolute structural strength. Thank you. Topic 3. Women in the Armed Forces. Hook. Good morning, respected GTO and friends. For decades, the debate centered on whether women were physically prepared for the crucible of military service. Today, that debate is closed. Women are no longer just looking at the horizon of national defense. They are actively defending it from the cockpit, the warship deck, and the Academy Square. Today I will speak on women in the Indian Armed Forces, driving institutional transformation. Background. Historically, the presence of women in the Indian military was restricted exclusively to the Armed Forces Medical Services, AFMS, and the Military Nursing Service, MNS. In 1992, the gates were open to non-medical branches through the Short Service Commission, SSC. However, career progression remained highly restricted, with women excluded from permanent commissions, command positions, and direct frontline combat roles due to traditional institutional mindsets and logistical constraints. Current situation. The armed forces are undergoing an expansive structural evolution toward gender parity. Supported by landmark Supreme Court rulings, women officers across all three services are now fully eligible for permanent commission PC. The institutional footprint has expanded significantly. Over 11,000 women officers serve across the forces. The historic first batches of women cadets have successfully graduated from the National Defense Academy, NDA, and the Indian Military Academy, IMA, and women are actively commanding operational units, flying supersonic fighter jets, and serving aboard frontline warships. Analysis. The integration of women is a profound operational necessity, not a superficial corporate box-ticking exercise. Modern warfare relies heavily on technological proficiency, intellectual leadership, and strategic capability, domains where talent is entirely gender-neutral. Denying half of the national population the opportunity to compete for core military leadership limits the recruitment pool, while full integration optimizes human resource deployment across advanced cyber, aerospace, and tactical commands. Challenges: historical infrastructure disparities. Legacy field accommodations, forward posts, and naval vessels were structurally built around all-male deployments, demanding continuous infrastructural modifications. Sociocultural reluctance. Overcoming deeply entrenched, patriarchal mindsets regarding the acceptance of women in direct command over all-male combat subunits. ACR and career progression anomalies. As flagged by the judiciary, legacy systems occasionally assessed short-service commission women officers through casual, non-standardized annual confidential reports, ACRs, which requires active structural standardization to ensure fair career competition. Way forward, gender-neutral infrastructural standardization. Mandating that all future defense procurements, from warship quarters to field tactical gear, are designed natively to accommodate diverse deployments. Objective meritocracy. Enforcing completely uniform, gender-blind performance benchmarks for promotions, elite training selections, and physical criteria to preserve absolute operational readiness. Comprehensive combat integration. Progressively expanding women's entry into the remaining direct land combat arms, infantry and armored corps, based strictly on operational suitability and specialized testing. Conclusion. To conclude, the inclusion of women in the armed forces is a definitive indicator of a modern, progressive, and resilient nation. True military capability is defined by professional competence, courage, and character, traits that wear a uniform, not a gender. By building a truly inclusive military, India ensures its defense forces remain both operationally lethal and democratically sound. Thank you. Topic 4. Cybersecurity. Hook. Good morning, gentlemen. A conventional missile gives you minutes of radar warning. A state-sponsored cyber weapon can sit silently inside a national power grid for years, waiting for the precise command to plunge an entire country into absolute darkness. Today, my topic is cybersecurity, safeguarding the invisible front line of modern warfare. Background. The historical definition of national security was entirely physical, focused on defending land boundaries, airspace, and maritime waters. However, the dawn of the Internet age birthed the fifth dimension of warfare, cyberspace. Because it features borderless accessibility, rapid transmission speeds, and plausible deniability, cyberspace has quickly become the primary domain for asymmetric gray zone warfare, where state and non-state actors strike critical national infrastructure without deploying physical troops. Current situation. The current threat landscape is marked by high volatility. Hostile nations routinely deploy advanced persistent threats, APTs, and ransomware syndicates as geopolitical proxies. India faces continuous cyber incursions targeting vital infrastructure, ranging from banking systems and satellite communication arrays to sensitive military databases and nuclear facility networks. In response, India has mobilized specialized defenses, anchored by the National Cyber Coordination Center, NCIPC, and the Tri-Service Defense Cyber Agency, DCYA. Analysis. Cybersecurity is no longer an isolated IT issue. It is a critical component of national sovereignty. A successful large-scale cyberstrike on our financial systems or power grids can paralyze the domestic economy and trigger widespread social panic faster than a physical invasion. Because cyber warfare features an attribution dilemma, making it difficult to quickly verify the true origin of a hack, it complicates traditional defense deterrence, allowing adversaries to exploit gray zones right below the threshold of open military conflict. Challenges. Critical infrastructure vulnerabilities. The increasing integration of legacy industrial control systems, SCADA, with public internet networks introduces severe security vulnerabilities. Indigenous hardware deficits. India remains highly dependent on foreign manufactured microchips, routers, and telecommunications hardware, creating risks of embedded hardware trojans and pre-installed spyware. Poor digital hygiene. The human element remains the weakest link in any advanced defense perimeter. Casual password management and vulnerability to phishing emails across government offices present continuous entry points for hackers. Way forward. Zero trust architecture. Implementing a strict, never trust, always verify digital protocol across all defense and critical infrastructure networks completely segregating administrative domains from operational layers. Mandating indigenous hardware supply chains, accelerating the India semiconductor mission to ensure all core military and governance servers run on verified, domestically designed and fabricated silicon chips. Developing a proactive cyber hunting posture, shifting our strategy from passive firewall defense to active, continuous cyber hunting, simultaneously formulating a transparent national cyber doctrine that outlines clear, asymmetric retaliatory protocols against hostile state-sponsored hackers. Conclusion. To wrap up, in the digital era, losing the cyber war means losing the physical war before the first shot is fired. Cyber resilience is the definitive shield of a modern nation. By combining rigorous digital hygiene with deep technological self-reliance, India can secure its digital frontiers and confidently project its global power. Thank you. Topic 5. ISRO, Indian Space Research Organization. Hook. Good morning, GTO and my friends. From transporting a primitive rocket nose cone on the back of a bicycle in Thumba in 1963 to becoming the first nation to plant its flag near the uncharted lunar South Pole, the story of ISRO is the story of India's self-reliance, resourcefulness, and scientific genius. Today I am going to speak on ISRO, propelling India into the elite stratosphere of space exploration. Background. Founded by the visionary Dr. Vikram Sarabhai in 1969, ISRO's initial mandate was entirely citizen-centric, utilizing space technology directly for national development, weather forecasting, teleeducation, and resource mapping. Operating under severe international technology denial regimes and sanctions, especially after India's nuclear tests, ISRO chose the path of intense indigenization, successfully developing the workhorse PSLV and the heavy-lift GSLV rockets from scratch. Current situation. ISRO has transitioned from a modest regional agency into an advanced global space superpower. Following the historic successes of Chandrayaan-3 and the Aditya L1 Solar Observatory, the organization is actively managing high-priority milestones. The current roadmap includes the upcoming Gaganyaan human spaceflight missions, the Venus Orbiter Mission (VOM), advanced demonstrations of autonomous space docking (SPADEX), and the phased modular construction of the Bharatiya Antariksh Station (BAS) by 2035. Analysis. ISRO acts as a monumental geopolitical and economic force multiplier for India. Geopolitical soft power. By delivering highly reliable, low-cost commercial launch services through its commercial arms like NSIL, India has positioned itself as the preferred space partner for the Global South, offering an affordable counterweight to Western and Chinese space networks. Economic multiplier. The open-door space sector reforms have catalyzed a booming domestic space tech ecosystem, which has grown to host over 400 private aerospace startups, driving local high-tech manufacturing and employment. Challenges. Heavy lift capacity gaps. While the LMV-3 is highly reliable, it remains limited in payload capacity compared to heavy-lift commercial rockets like SpaceX's Falcon Heavy, requiring the rapid development of our next-generation launch vehicle, NGLV. High component dependency. India still faces import dependencies for advanced space-grade electronics and specialized, radiation-hardened microsensors. Orbital debris management. The accelerating problem of space debris in low Earth orbit, LEO, presents continuous operational risks to active satellite constellations, demanding resource-intensive collision avoidance maneuvers. Way forward. Accelerating private-public partnerships. Fully transitioning routine satellite manufacturing and commercial launch operations to private consortia, allowing ISRO's core scientific talent to focus entirely on deep space exploration and advanced R&D. Rapid commercialization of NGLV. Prioritizing the development and flight testing of the semi-cryogenic, reusable next-generation launch vehicle to drastically lower per-kilogram launch costs and capture a larger share of the global commercial space market. Expanding global strategic alliances. Deepening joint planetary observation and climate monitoring initiatives, like the joint Nizar and Trishna satellite missions, to firmly cement India's status as a responsible, cooperative global space leader. Conclusion. In conclusion, ISRO is the ultimate validation of Indian ingenuity and resilience. It proves that financial constraints are no barrier to achieving scientific excellence when backed by clear vision and relentless determination. As ISRO charts its course toward the Moon, Venus, and our own space station, it continues to assure the world that India's rise in space will always serve the broader cause of global peace and human progress. Thank you. Topic 6. Defense Modernization. Hook. Good morning, respected GTO and my dear friends. A nation that sleeps on its legacy hardware wakes up to territorial loss. In an era where a multi-million-dollar third-generation tank can be neutralized by a pocket-sized loitering munition, a military's true strength lies not in its historical size, but in its technological adaptive velocity. Today I stand before you to speak on defense modernization, building India's strategic autonomy. Background. Historically, India's defense architecture was heavily reliant on legacy, import-heavy frameworks, heavily dominated by Soviet and Russian platforms. For decades, procurement was sluggish. Capital acquisitions were bogged down by bureaucratic bottlenecks, and the domestic defense industry was stifled by the monopolistic, slow-moving structures of the Legacy Ordnance Factory Board, OFB. This structure left our frontline forces highly vulnerable to sudden foreign supply chain disruptions and political arm twisting during global crises. Current situation, India has witnessed a monumental, calibrated paradigm shift. The defense budget for the financial year 2026-27 has surged to an all-time high of 7.85 lakh rupees crore, accounting for nearly 15% of total central government expenditure. Crucially, capital expenditure has scaled. Topic 1. Artificial Scaled up to 2.19 lakh rupees crore with a staggering 75%, 1.39 lakh rupees crore explicitly earmarked for domestic procurement. Under the Atmanirbhar Bharat vision, India's defense exports have crossed a record 38,400 crore rupees, transforming the nation from an institutional weapon importer into an exporter supplying arms to over 80 democratic nations. Analysis. Defense modernization is no longer just about acquiring hardware. It is about achieving comprehensive operational self-reliance. The corporatization of the archaic OFB into 7 agile public entities, the implementation of strict positive indigenization lists, and the operationalization of twin defense industrial corridors in Uttar Pradesh and Tamil Nadu are structurally reshaping the economy. Furthermore, the induction of indigenous flagships like the INS Vikrant aircraft carrier, the Tejas Mk-1A fighter jets, and the global export of BrahMos missiles to the Philippines show that India is successfully matching continental security pressures with advanced domestic maritime and aerospace assets. Challenges: the technology transfer and R&D gap. While domestic private players have excelled at licensed assembly and manufacturing, the foundational intellectual property, IP, for high-end subsystems, such as advanced jet engines, e.g., Kaveri engine dependencies, and semiconductor chips, remains excessively dependent on foreign technology. Legacy capital revenue imbalance. Despite massive capital hikes, a major slice of the defense allocation is routinely consumed by revenue expenditures, specifically military salaries and mounting defense pensions. Allotted 1.71 lakh rupees crore in 2026, limiting the financial liquidity required for hypervelocity technological shifts. Inter-service synergy delays. The seamless structural integration of the Army, Navy, and Air Force into functional joint theater commands is still experiencing operational friction, delaying unified command optimization. Way forward: aggressive scaling of IDEX and ADIDI schemes, expanding the reach of the Innovations for Defense Excellence IDEX platform to actively fund domestic deep tech startups working on quantum computing, hypersonics, and advanced sensor suites. Enforcing a modernized DAP, strictly implementing the updated Defense Acquisition Procedure DAP guidelines to mandate up to 60% indigenous content while streamlining fast-track single-window clearances for domestic private defense conglomerates. Operationalizing theater commands, swiftly resolving bureaucratic disputes between services to establish active theater commands, maximizing the operational utility of every modernized platform. Conclusion. To conclude, military modernization is not a destination. It is a continuous race against obsolescence. India's transition toward an indigenous, high-tech defense ecosystem ensures that the Indian Armed Forces can defend our borders from a position of absolute, uncompromised structural strength. For a developed India, our security must be guaranteed by weapons forged entirely on our own soil. Thank you. Topic 7. Drone Technology. Hook. Good morning, gentlemen. In contemporary warfare, the ultimate high ground is no longer a mountain peak. It is a $300 autonomous quadcopter hovering silently in the clouds. Today, my topic is drone technology, redefining the visual and tactical realities of the modern battlefield. Background. Unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, were historically treated as supplementary, high-cost reconnaissance tools reserved for strategic surveillance by major superpowers. However, the rapid democratization of commercial electronics, advanced lithium batteries, and open-source flight software over the past decade transformed drones into highly disruptive, low-cost asymmetric weapons. The classical military doctrines that relied heavily on thick, armor-plated ground forces are being rewritten by the asymmetric lethality of unmanned systems. Current situation. The global military drone market is accelerating rapidly, projected to hit $34.85 billion in 2026 and race past $109 billion by 2031. Drones are no longer single-purpose remote-controlled toys. They are deployed as highly networked mission families. On the domestic front, the Indian Armed Forces have aggressively integrated tactical drone swarms along our high-altitude northern borders. Through domestic programs like the Technology Development Fund, TDF, and collaborative academic tie-ups with hubs like IIT Kanpur, India is building localized manufacturing pipelines for first-person view FPV kamikaze drones, persistent loitering munitions, and automated counter-drone laser interception systems. Analysis. Drones have completely democratized aerial reconnaissance and fire precision. A field commander can now launch a micro-UAV from the palm of their hand to scan enemy lines, bypassing traditional satellite latency. Economically and tactically, the ratio is profoundly skewed. A $500 drone carrying a shaped charge can permanently disable a multi-million-dollar modern main battle tank or take down a vital surveillance radar. This forces an adversary to exhaust expensive air defense missiles, executing an unsustainable economic exchange rate. Challenges. The drone revolution deception, strategic over-reliance. As highlighted by the Modern War Institute, public discourse often treats drones as a complete substitute for military strategy. In reality, tactical drone success relies entirely on an invisible, highly vulnerable ecosystem of logistics, maintenance depots, and continuous electronic battery replenishment. Drones alter tactical steps, but they do not eliminate the fundamental requirement for integrated ground forces. Electronic warfare and signal jamming vulnerabilities. Drones are inherently reliant on secure radio frequencies and GNSS coordinates. High-powered state-sponsored electronic warfare EW suites can sever command data links or execute spoofing attacks, rendering unprotected drone swarms useless. Critical subcomponent dependencies. Despite India's booming assembly market, core components, such as high-torque brushless motors, specialized carbon fiber propellers, and electronic speed controllers, ESCs, are still largely imported from East Asian markets. Way forward, achieving absolute component indigenization, utilizing production-linked incentive (PLI) schemes to set up native manufacturing units for high-end drone motors, sensors, and secure military-grade data links. Deploying AI-driven autonomous flight software, transitioning away from remotely piloted systems toward edge AI vision processing. Drones must be capable of navigating, avoiding obstacles, and identifying targets entirely on board without relying on GPS or active radio communication signals. Scaling layered anti-drone systems. Equipping every tactical field unit with a combination of soft kill options, directional jammers, and hard kill assets, directed energy lasers and kinetic interceptor nets, to secure our own formations from enemy swarms. Conclusion. To summarize, drone technology has permanently dissolved the traditional boundary between tactical success and strategic advantage. The nation that masters the production, deployment, and electronic defense of unmanned systems will dominate the future security landscape. India must continue to rapidly innovate, ensuring our forces hold the definitive upper hand in this robotic evolution of warfare. Thank you. Topic 8. The Quad. Quadrilateral Security Dialogue. Hook. Good morning, respected GTO and friends. 4 major maritime democracies spanning across 2 oceans, bound by a shared commitment to an open, rules-based international order, yet persistently scrutinized as an Asian NATO by its detractors. Today I will speak on the Quad, securing the maritime and economic arteries of the Indo-Pacific. Background. The Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, comprising India, the United States, Japan, and Australia, was originally initiated in 2004 as an ad hoc coordination group for humanitarian assistance following the Indian Ocean tsunami. Formally conceptualized as a diplomatic group by Japan's Shinzo Abe in 2007, the alliance quickly went dormant due to regional hesitation. It was decisively resurrected in 2017 in response to China's aggressive unilateral expansionism, island militarization in the South China Sea, and coercive economic policies across the Indo-Pacific region. Current situation. Moving into 2026, the Quad has transformed into a robust, multidimensional institutional partnership. At the recent Quad Foreign Ministers meeting in New Delhi, the alliance launched the historic Indo-Pacific Maritime Surveillance Collaboration, IPMSC, to create an unclassified, real-time common operating picture, COP, across regional maritime zones. Beyond hard defense, the alliance has announced the Quad Critical Minerals Initiative framework, backed by a massive $20 billion public-private funding pool, alongside commitments to completely connect all Pacific Island countries via secure, resilient undersea data cables. Analysis. The Quad is India's premier strategic vehicle for external balancing without entering into a formal, binding military alliance. By keeping the coalition focused on providing public goods, such as HADR operations, maritime domain awareness, semiconductor supply chains, and green shipping corridors, the Quad effectively counters Chinese hegemony without alienating neutral Southeast Asian nations. For India, it serves as a net multiplier, enabling the Indian Navy to extend its operational surveillance eyes deep into the Western Pacific while securing the vital Malacca Strait choke point. Challenges: the continental versus maritime security divergence. While the US, Japan, and Australia view the Quad primarily through a maritime lens to contain China in the Pacific, India remains the only member sharing an active, tense 3,488-kilometer land border, the LAC, with Beijing, necessitating a highly distinct operational calculus. ASEAN centrality friction. Smaller Southeast Asian nations within ASEAN occasionally fear that the expanding clout of the Quad might dilute their regional diplomatic centrality or drag them into an unwanted, volatile superpower crossfire. Varying strategic priorities on secondary fronts. Divergences among member states regarding non-Indo-Pacific challenges, such as India's balanced stance on the Russia-Ukraine theater, can sometimes strain the unified political messaging of the grouping. Way forward. Operationalizing the Indo-Pacific Logistics Network, IPLN. Rapidly conducting multimodal tabletop exercises, TTX, to establish seamless, reciprocal military logistics, sharing across member naval bases to optimize long-range maritime deployments. Securing critical tech supply chains. Aggressively executing the Quad Critical Minerals Framework to break the global monopoly held by Beijing over rare earth elements, securing the inputs needed for our domestic semiconductor and EV industries. Expanding comprehensive cybersecurity cooperation. Collaborating to protect regional undersea data cables and training partner nations to counter state-sponsored transnational cybercrime syndicates. Conclusion. In conclusion, the Quad is the definitive geopolitical anchor of the Indo-Pacific region. It is not an instrument of military aggression, but a necessary democratic shield ensuring the global commons remain free, open, and inclusive. By driving tangible economic and security deliverables, the Quad will continue to ensure that no single state can unilaterally alter the geopolitical balance of Asia. Thank you. Topic 9. BRICS. Hook. Good morning, everyone. Born as an acronym coined by an investment banker to track high-growth emerging markets, it has evolved into a massive, expanded geopolitical bloc that represents over 45% of the global population and outpaces the G7 in purchasing power parity. Today, my topic is BRICS, redefining global governance in a multipolar world. Background. Formed in 2006 by Brazil, Russia, India, and China, with South Africa joining in 2011, BRICS was established to challenge the Western-dominated post-World War II financial architecture, primarily controlled by the IMF and the World Bank. The grouping sought to provide a collective diplomatic platform to amplify the voices of emerging markets and developing countries, EMDCs, and drive reforms toward an equitable, global economic order. Current situation. In 2026, the bloc has expanded its global footprint, operating as BRICS+. Following the expansion that integrated Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE, alongside the formal induction of partner countries like Malaysia, Thailand, and Vietnam, the group holds immense geopolitical weight. Under India's BRICS chairship, under the theme Building for Resilience, Innovation, Cooperation, and Sustainability, the focus has firmly shifted from mere political rhetoric to actionable, development-focused outcomes, specifically targeting digital public infrastructure, DPI, trade resilience, and inclusive climate finance solutions. Analysis. BRICS serves as a key platform for India to balance its foreign policy alignments. While India actively participates in Western-oriented forums like the Quad and the G20, its leadership within BRICS cements its position as the undisputed voice of the Global South. Through the New Development Bank, NDB, BRICS provides member nations with access to non-conditional developmental loans, offering a crucial alternative to traditional Western financial avenues. It ensures that the transition toward a multipolar world order is fair and representative. BRICS plus geopolitical footprint, 2026. Demographic weight, economic output, approximately 45% of global POP. outpaces G7 in GDP, PPP. Challenges. Internal strategic incongruence. The deepest structural challenge within BRICS is the ongoing bilateral friction between India and China. While India champions BRICS as a non-Western developmental forum, Beijing continuously attempts to weaponize the expanded bloc into an explicitly anti-Western geopolitical tool to advance its own global strategic narrative. The de-dollarization rhetoric versus reality. While certain members like Russia and China push heavily for aggressive de-dollarization and the launch of a unified BRICS currency, nations like India prefer a pragmatic approach, prioritizing national currency settlements, like the rupee-dirham trade, over an artificial, highly volatile common currency. Heterogeneous economic profiles. The vast structural differences between the economic models of the expanded member list make establishing unified trade regulations or synchronized custom rules highly complex. Way forward. Strengthening the New Development Bank, NDB. Expanding the capital limits of the NDB to act as a supplement to traditional global financial institutions, funding sustainable green energy transitions across developing countries without imposing harsh domestic structural adjustment conditions. Exporting India's digital public infrastructure, DPI, leveraging the BRICS platform to export India's highly successful technological frameworks like UPI, Aadhaar, and ONDC to foster vibrant, secure digital startup ecosystems across the global south. Consensus-based institutional expansion, ensuring that any future structural entry of new partner countries remains strictly bound by the clear criteria established during the Kazan and Johannesburg summits, preventing the dilution of the group's core mandate. Conclusion. To wrap up, BRICS is a vivid reflection of the modern, multipolar geopolitical reality. Despite internal contradictions, it remains an indispensable platform for global economic democratization. By leading from the front, India can steer BRICS to ensure it remains a proactive force for global stability, structural resilience, and inclusive development. Thank you. Topic 10. Climate Change. Hook. Good morning, respected GTO and friends. Nature does not read border treaties, nor does it recognize geopolitical superpowers. A carbon molecule emitted in one hemisphere can trigger a devastating cloudburst or glacial lake outburst in the other, proving that humanity is bound by a shared ecological destiny. Today I stand before you to speak on climate change, the ultimate existential threat to global security. Background. Since the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, the unchecked burning of fossil fuels, mass deforestation, and carbon-heavy industrial models have continuously elevated greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere. The Global Climate Consensus, formalized in the historic 2015 Paris Agreement, committed nations to limit global warming to well below 2 and preferably 1.5 degrees Celsius compared to pre-industrial levels. However, global collective action has lagged, turning climate change from a distant environmental projection into an active, escalating multidimensional crisis. Current situation. We are witnessing severe climate anomalies globally. The rapid melting of the Arctic ice cap has transformed the polar region into a strategic zone, accelerating global sea level rise that directly threatens hundreds of low-lying coastal cities. Nationally, India is facing severe weather extremes, ranging from prolonged droughts and agricultural breadbaskets to intense heat waves and flash floods. In response, India has mobilized its Panchamrit commitments, racing toward 500 gigawatts of non-fossil fuel energy capacity and deploying massive fiscal support under the National Green Hydrogen Mission and the Rare Earth Permanent Magnets (REPM) scheme to anchor green technology supply chains. Analysis. Climate change is a massive national security threat and economic disruptor. For an agrarian economy like India, erratic monsoons directly threaten food security and risk triggering severe groundwater depletion. Geopolitically, climate change acts as a risk multiplier. Ecological degradation across neighboring low-lying regions can trigger massive waves of climate refugees crossing international borders, straining local administrative infrastructure, and triggering severe domestic resource friction. Challenges. The global climate finance deficit. While advanced economies are historically responsible for the vast majority of cumulative atmospheric carbon emissions, they have consistently failed to deliver on their structural promises to mobilize the necessary hundreds of billions of dollars annually in loss and damage funds for developing countries. The intermittency and grid stability puzzle. Transitioning rapidly away from stable coal power towards solar and wind introduces immense power grid vulnerabilities. Without massive, cost-effective grid-scale battery storage solutions, maintaining industrial power consistency remains exceptionally difficult. Greenwashing and regulatory exploitation. Many global corporate entities employ superficial branding to package carbon-heavy activities as eco-friendly without executing real modifications to their foundational supply chains. Way forward, enforcing strict circular economy mandates, maximizing industrial resource reuse, mandating electronic waste recycling, and scaling up eco-resilient construction codes across all urban infrastructure projects, pivoting to pumped hydro and nuclear power, expanding India's baseline nuclear power capabilities alongside pumped hydro storage installations to effectively balance the natural intermittency of solar and wind generation, demanding binding climate justice via BRICS and G20, leveraging India's diplomatic leadership to hold developed countries accountable, ensuring the rapid transfer of green technologies and clean processing know-how to the global south without restrictive patent blockades. Conclusion. To conclude, balancing economic development with environmental conservation is the defining challenge of our GE. Of our generation. Climate change cannot be resolved by isolated policies. It requires an absolute transformation in how we produce, consume, and secure our resources. By driving robust domestic green innovations and standing firm as a responsible global climate leader, India will secure both its economic future and its ecological survival. Thank you. Topic 11. Water conservation. Hook. Good morning, respected GTO and my dear friends. A famous saying reminds us that water is the driving force of all nature. Yet, while India holds nearly 18% of the global population, it possesses a mere 4% of the world's renewable water resources. Today, I stand before you to speak on a matter of absolute survival: water conservation, securing India's liquid wealth. Background. Historically, India relied on community-driven water harvesting structures like baolis, johads, and taankas. However, the advent of the Green Revolution, extensive deep tube well technology, and rapid, unscientific urbanization led to massive groundwater depletion. The NITI Aayog's Composite Water Management Index has long warned that several major Indian cities face severe water stress, shifting water conservation from an environmental tagline to a hardcore national security priority. Current situation. To address this crisis, the Ministry of Jal Shakti has driven massive center-state alignment. The landmark Jal Jeevan mission has successfully provided functional tap water connections to over 75% of rural households. Furthermore, the newly launched Mahawater mission, backed by an initial 200 crore rupees allocation via the Anusandhan National Research Foundation, ANRF, is actively fostering deep technological and startup-led solutions to enhance water use efficiency and ecological river health, supported by localized field initiatives like the national #CatchTheRain campaign. Analysis. Water conservation requires balancing geopolitical, domestic, and economic vectors. Geopolitically, upper riparian river maneuvers by neighbors require India to secure its hydrological frontiers. Domestically, interstate water conflicts strain federal stability. Economically, agriculture consumes over 80% of our freshwater. Therefore, modernizing water delivery via advanced data models directly prevents structural food supply failures. Challenges. Highly inefficient agricultural subsidies. The provision of free or highly subsidized power in major agricultural belts encourages uncontrolled groundwater pumping, driving the cultivation of water-intensive crops like paddy and sugarcane in naturally semi-arid regions. Fragmented last-mile recharging. While massive check dams are constructed, localized urban rainwater harvesting rules are routinely ignored by municipal builders, causing huge rainwater runoff losses during monsoons. Industrial effluent violations. Weak implementation of zero liquid discharge norms allows untreated industrial waste to leach directly into freshwater aquifers, systematically poisoning the remaining clean groundwater supplies. Way forward, mandating micro-irrigation clusters, transitioning agricultural incentives toward localized drip and sprinkler networks, actively rewarding farmers who maintain high water use efficiency. Green urban infrastructure mandates, enforcing strict municipal penalties for commercial properties that fail to maintain operational rainwater harvesting systems. Advanced recycling loops, scaling up municipal wastewater treatment plants to recycle gray water for industrial and non-potable civic use, reducing the extraction burden on natural rivers. Conclusion. To conclude, the battles of the future will be fought over water resources, not fossil fuels. India's aggressive integration of scientific research with citizen-led campaigns is a step in the right direction. By treating water as a finite strategic asset rather than an infinite commodity, we safeguard our ecological survival and national prosperity. Thank you. Topic 12. Digital Payments and UPI. Hook. Good morning, gentlemen. In the span of less than a decade, India transitioned from a heavily cash-dependent society into a global pioneer, where a roadside vegetable vendor accepts instant micropayments via a printed QR code. Today, my topic is digital payments and UPI, the silent revolution architecting India's fintech supremacy. Background. Prior to 2016, India's financial ecosystem was structurally defined by physical cash velocity, high banking transaction frictions, and limited credit transparency for small-scale merchants. The launch of the Unified Payments Interface (UPI) in 2016 by the National Payments Corporation of India (NPCI) fundamentally dissolved these barriers by creating a secure, real-time, interoperable peer-to-peer and peer-to-merchant payment rail. Current situation: UPI has broken all global real-time payment records, officially scaling past 23 billion monthly transactions, processing nearly 30 trillion rupees in value. On average, the platform manages over 730 million daily transactions with flawless system stability. To deepen its strategic reach, NPCI has operationalized advanced features like UPI Lite for offline microtransactions, credit line on UPI, and expanded cross-border retail linkages with international markets like France, the UAE, Singapore, and Sri Lanka. UPI Monthly Scale. NPCI Data. Transaction Volume. Transaction Value. 23.2 billion /month tilde 29.9 trillion rupees per mo. Analysis. UPI acts as a monumental economic force multiplier. By formalizing the informal retail economy, it creates a transparent digital data footprint that enables traditional banks to extend low-cost credit to small businesses without requiring heavy physical collateral. Geopolitically, the export of the UPI architecture strengthens India's digital soft power, building an independent alternative to Western-dominated card monopolies. Challenges. Market share concentration risk. The UPI ecosystem features a stark duopoly, with two dominant apps controlling over 80% of total transaction volume. This concentration triggers operational single point of failure concerns. Sophisticated cyber mule and phishing fraud. The rapid entry of digitally inexperienced citizens has been targeted by cyber criminals utilizing social engineering, unauthorized collect requests, and fraudulent digital banking tokens. Zero merchant discount rate, MDR friction. The mandate of zero transaction fees on standard UPI transactions strains the revenue generation of fintech startups, slowing long-term infrastructural investments into remote rural networks. Way forward. Enforcing diversification protocols, collaborating with third-party app providers to drive consumer adoption across smaller payment applications, creating a resilient, decentralized ecosystem. Advanced AI fraud detection firewalls, implementing real-time, network-level AI anomaly detection models to automatically flag and freeze accounts demonstrating high-velocity suspicious transfers. Targeted MDR adjustments for commercial tiers. Introducing low-capped transaction fee structures exclusively for high-turnover enterprise merchants to fund rural digital banking terminals. Conclusion. To wrap up, UPI is not just a financial platform. It is India's digital public infrastructure masterpiece. It proves that when technology is made accessible, affordable, and secure, grassroots adoption can outpace any developed nation. By safeguarding this ecosystem against cyber vulnerabilities and expanding its global footprint, India will continue to lead the global digital payments narrative. Thank you. Topic 13. Startup India. Hook. Good morning, respected GTO and friends. There was a time when success for an educated Indian youth was defined entirely by securing a conventional corporate job. Today, the ultimate ambition is to build a scalable enterprise that transforms global markets. Today, I will speak on Startup India, catalyzing innovation, risk capital, and job creation. Background. Launched in January 2016, the Startup India initiative was conceptualized to dismantle the restrictive regulatory frameworks, licensing delays, and critical funding gaps that traditionally choked early-stage entrepreneurship. By creating tax exemptions, patent rebates, and dedicated incubation centers, the policy aimed to shift India away from a pure service delivery economy toward a high-value product innovation hub. Current situation: the Indian startup ecosystem has achieved phenomenal scale, with total recognized entities surging past 2.23 lakh startups, generating more than 23.36 lakh direct jobs. In the recent financial year alone, A record 55,200-plus new entities were formally recognized, marking the highest addition since the program's inception. Geographically, innovation has thoroughly decentralized. While Maharashtra and Karnataka lead, states like Uttar Pradesh and Gujarat have emerged as powerful enterprise hubs, backed by an expanded credit guarantee scheme for startups that provides up to 20 crore rupees in risk coverage per borrower. Analysis: startups are the primary engine driving India's industrial diversification. Through the Fund of Funds for Startups, FFS, and the Startup India Seed Fund scheme, the government has leveraged private venture capital, de-risking early-stage investments in critical deep tech sectors like aerospace, defense tech, agri-tech, and biotechnology. Furthermore, onboarding over 6,500 startups onto the government e-marketplace, GEM, gives these young firms direct procurement access to massive public sector contracts. Challenges: the funding winter and valuation recorrections. After an era of easy capital, global macroeconomic tightening has triggered a funding crunch, forcing early-stage startups to prioritize immediate cash flow over long-term technological research. Deep technological import reliance. While software as a service, SaaS, and fintech startups have boomed, hardware and advanced deep tech ventures remain dependent on foreign countries for microchips, rare earth magnets, and precision laboratory testing gear. Corporate governance lapses. Recent financial misstatements and compliance failures across high-profile unicorn startups have highlighted the urgent need for robust internal audit controls. Way forward: massive capital mobilization for deep tech, directly channeling the Fund of Funds 2.0 capital pools exclusively toward high-gestation hardware fabrication, defense innovation, and artificial intelligence ventures, mandating independent board audits, requiring startups that cross specific public funding thresholds to maintain independent, certified audit committees to institutionalize corporate governance. Grassroots incubator densification, expanding specialized tech incubators into Tier 2 and Tier 3 academic institutions to convert regional engineering talent into local IP creators. Conclusion: in summary, the Startup India initiative has successfully unlocked the latent creative potential of our demographic asset. Startups are no longer just an economic subsector. They are the frontline architects of Atmanirbhar Bharat. By backing this entrepreneurial drive with strict regulatory transparency and deep tech funding, we ensure India remains a dominant global center of innovation. Thank you. Topic 14. Mental health. Hook. Good morning, everyone. We live in a society that readily rushes an individual to an emergency room for a fractured bone, yet often expects someone struggling with a fractured mind to simply snap out of it. Today, my topic is mental health, destigmatizing the invisible crisis and rebuilding public health resilience. Background: for decades, mental health issues in India were pushed to the absolute fringes of public discourse, heavily suppressed by social stigma, fear of institutional isolation, and an absolute shortage of professional psychiatric infrastructure. The World Health Organization has long identified depressive and anxiety disorders as primary drivers of long-term economic productivity losses, highlighting that a nation cannot achieve comprehensive health security while overlooking mental well-being. Current situation: India has executed a vital structural pivot toward mental health care accessibility. The national framework is anchored by the National Tele-Mental Health Program, Telemanas, which has successfully set up 53 operational cells across 36 states and union territories, supporting over 20 regional languages and addressing more than 34.34 lakh helpline calls. The launch of the dedicated Telemanas mobile app and video consultation upgrades has further expanded care access, alongside specialized cell deployments at premium institutions like AFMC Pune to support defense personnel and their families. Analysis: mental health is a critical component of national human capital. Academic pressure, rapid hyper-urbanization, economic precarity, and digital isolation have elevated anxiety indices among the youth. By integrating the District Mental Health Program, DMHP, across over 760 districts and placing trained health and wellness ambassadors within schools under the Ayushman Bharat initiative, the public health sector is shifting from reactive psychiatric institutionalization to early, community-led psychological support. Challenges: extreme workforce shortages. India faces an acute deficit of certified psychiatrists, clinical psychologists, and psychiatric social workers per capita, creating an operational bottleneck for extensive face-to-face therapies. Persistent grassroots stigma. In rural and semi-urban landscapes, common clinical anxiety and clinical depressive disorders are frequently misattributed to personal weakness, preventing early professional intervention. The digital echo chamber strain. Unregulated, long-duration social media exposure exposes young demographics to continuous comparison anxiety and digital bullying, accelerating youth mental stress. Way forward: standardizing community-based counseling networks. training grassroots workers like ASHA and A&M staff in basic psychological first aid to execute early screening during regular home visits. Mandated corporate and academic well-being blocks, requiring educational institutions and high-stress corporate environments to maintain dedicated, confidential counseling infrastructure. Rapid integration of hybrid teletherapy, leveraging Telemana's digital nodes to offer seamless, low-cost video psychotherapy sessions, bypassing regional specialist shortages. Conclusion. To conclude, mental health is not a luxury issue. It is a foundational pillar of national health and productivity. By actively dismantling historical prejudices, scaling digital counseling platforms, and embedding emotional well-being within our education systems, India can ensure its citizens are both physically invincible and mentally resilient. Thank you. Topic 15. Role of Youth in Viksit Bharat 2047. Hook. Good morning, GTO and my friends. Demography is destiny. As the rest of the developed world faces the structural strain of an aging population, India stands unique with over 65% of its citizens below the age of 35. Today I stand before you to speak on the role of youth in Viksit Bharat 2047, transforming the demographic dividend into global leadership. Background. The year 2047 marks the centenary of India's independence, the designated timeline for the nation to permanently transition into a fully developed economy. Historically, large young populations in developing nations have either served as the primary driver of high-velocity industrial transformations, as seen in the East Asian miracle, or faced structural unemployment vulnerabilities if unguided by strategic state investment. The modern youth cohort holds the key to determining which trajectory India secures. Current situation. Indian youth are driving massive societal and technological transformations. They anchor the world's third-largest startup ecosystem, led major grassroots digital literacy drives, and form the core execution layer of national initiatives like Digital India and Make in India. Through government platforms like the National Youth Parliament Festival and the Mera Yuva Bharat, My Bharat portal, millions of young citizens are directly engaging in localized community development, civic auditing, and rural welfare distribution logistics. Analysis. The role of youth spans three critical strategic frontiers. Technological sovereignty, harnessing technical capabilities to build native intellectual property in fields like quantum computing, aerospace, green hydrogen, and artificial intelligence. Civic and ethical leadership, moving away from passive political observers to active drivers of transparent, digital, and accountable public governance models. Global soft power expansion, projecting the nation's intellectual, athletic, and cultural excellence across international competitive arenas. Challenges. The industry skill mismatch. A significant percentage of technical graduates possess formal degrees but lack immediate, hands-on industrial coding, precision engineering, or analytical problem-solving skills requiring immediate upskilling interventions. Risks of digital radicalization and polarization. Unregulated exposure to deepfakes, online echo chambers, and synthetic misinformation campaigns can misdirect youthful energy into social polarization rather than national development. The brain drain vulnerability. High-end scientific and technological talent frequently chooses migration to Western economies due to initial research infrastructure gaps domestically, pulling vital intellectual property out of the country. Way forward. Grassroots implementation of NEP 2020, rapidly expanding vocational training, AI literacy modules, and multidisciplinary academic research models right from high school levels to bridge the skill gap. Building premier R&D innovation clusters. Establishing world-class research infrastructure within Indian universities, backed by the National Research Foundation to retain top-tier scientific talent. Channeling youth via institutional volunteerism. Scaling the My Bharat framework to engage young professionals in structured rural development, disaster relief operations, and environmental conservation projects. Conclusion. To summarize, Viksit Bharat 2047 is not a passive policy target. It is an active generational mission. The youth are not merely the future beneficiaries of a developed India. They are its frontline builders today. By combining character, discipline, and technological expertise, the youth of this nation will ensure that India's centenary year marks its return to the absolute peak of global prosperity and leadership. Thank you. Topic 16. Terrorism. Hook. Good morning, respected GTO and my dear friends. A single bullet can kill a person, but an act of terrorism seeks to assassinate the collective psychological resolve of an entire nation. In the 21st century, the front lines of this battle are no longer restricted to rugged mountain borders. They have bled into our cyber networks, financial systems, and urban squares. Today I stand before you to speak on terrorism, combating the asymmetric threat to global peace. Background. Terrorism is the unlawful use of violence, intimidation, and coercion against civilians or states to achieve ideological, political, or religious goals. Historically, modern terrorism emerged in waves, from the nationalist separatist movements of the mid-20th century to the rise of transnational religious extremism at the turn of the millennium. India has faced state-sponsored cross-border terrorism for over 4 decades, fundamentally shaping its domestic security protocols and global foreign policy alignments. Situation. Modern terrorism operates as a hyper-networked, globalized matrix. While traditional kinetic command structures of groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda have been structurally degraded by international military coalitions, the threat has mutated. Hostile state actors continue to execute sophisticated proxy warfare along India's borders. Simultaneously, state actors continue to execute sophisticated proxy warfare along India's borders. Simultaneously, global security agencies are tracking a rise in decentralized lone wolf attacks and the rapid proliferation of affiliate networks across the African continent and West Asia, forcing counterterrorism agencies to continually update their defensive measures. Analysis: terrorism is an asymmetric threat that exploits the open nature of democratic societies. The tactical paradigm has shifted toward gray zone warfare. Hostile networks leverage modern technologies, such as commercial drone swarms to drop payloads across borders, end-to-end encrypted messaging applications to radicalize vulnerable youth remotely, and unregulated cryptocurrency channels to bypass global anti-money laundering frameworks. For India, defeating terrorism requires a unified approach that simultaneously tackles ideological radicalization, financial networks, and cross-border infiltration routes. The modern terrorism threat matrix. Tactical gray zone tools, financial and structural base, encrypted apps, custom drones, crypto, state-sponsored proxies. Challenges: the geopolitical good versus bad terrorist dichotomy. The lack of a universally accepted definition of terrorism at the United Nations prevents seamless global enforcement. Hostile powers routinely utilize technical vetoes at the UNSC to block the designation of known transnational terrorists. The asymmetric cost dynamic. A low-cost, amateur cyber hack or basic improvised device can inflict massive economic and structural damage, forcing democratic states to exhaust billions in defensive infrastructure, creating an unfavorable economic exchange rate. The nexus of organized crime, the convergence of drug trafficking networks, illegal arms smuggling, and human trafficking syndicates creates a self-sustaining financial loop for rogue networks. Way forward. Driving consensus on the CCIT. India must continue to exert maximum diplomatic pressure at the UN to pass the Comprehensive Convention on International Terrorism, CCIT, to establish a binding international definition. Strengthening intelligence and technical integration, maximizing the multi-agency coordination capabilities of NATGRID, MAC, and the National Investigation Agency, NIA, to execute real-time AI-driven tracking of suspicious financial anomalies. Grassroots counter-radicalization programs, deploying proactive community policing and digital literacy drives to identify and disrupt online radicalization channels before they manifest into local security failures. Conclusion. To conclude, terrorism is a direct assault on human civilization and democratic values. India's uncompromising stance of zero tolerance against terror must remain the cornerstone of our national security. By combining sharp kinetic deterrence with robust global financial blockades, we ensure our nation remains safe, stable, and sovereign. Thank you. Topic 17. Cashless economy. Hook. Good morning, gentlemen. In less than a decade, India has engineered an economic marvel, transitioning from a society historically dominated by physical cash to the undisputed global capital of real-time digital payments. Today, my topic is the cashless economy, formalizing wealth and driving financial inclusion. Background. Historically, the Indian economic landscape was characterized by a massive informal sector, extensive tax evasion, and heavy cash transactions that imposed substantial systemic management costs on the central bank. The structural push toward a digital-first economy was accelerated by the Digital India launch in 2015, followed by the historic introduction of the Unified Payments Interface (UPI) by the National Payments Corporation of India, NPCI, in 2016. Current situation: India has emerged as the world's largest real-time payment market. Data from the NPCI for the full financial year 2025-26 shows UPI transaction volumes skyrocketed to a record 241.6 billion, processing an astonishing 314.23 trillion rupees in value. On average, the ecosystem manages over 730 million transactions daily. India now commands nearly half of the world's real-time digital transactions, with the platform successfully expanding its cross-border linkages to nations like France, the UAE, Singapore, Sri Lanka, and Mauritius. Analysis: the transition to a cashless economy is a massive structural force multiplier. By converting paper transactions into transparent digital trails, the formalization of the economy expands the national tax base, providing the state with the revenues needed for large-scale infrastructure building. Furthermore, this data wealth enables traditional financial institutions to assess the creditworthiness of small-scale rural merchants without requiring physical collateral, directly democratizing credit access. Challenges: the sophisticated cyber fraud surge. The onboarding of millions of digitally inexperienced citizens into the cashless ecosystem has been targeted by complex phishing networks and unauthorized digital banking tokens. The rural digital divide. While urban centers are effectively cashless, remote rural pockets continue to experience last-mile internet latency and smartphone accessibility gaps. Systemic concentration risks. The retail app space remains heavily concentrated within a few private fintech platforms, creating single point-of-failure concerns if a primary system encounters sudden downtime. Way forward: scaling the digital rupee, e-rupee, accelerating the deployment of the Reserve Bank of India's central bank digital currency, CBDC, to offer a non-internet-dependent sovereign alternative to private applications, enforcing zero-trust cybersecurity protocols, implementing real-time, AI-driven network anomaly detection to automatically freeze fraudulent transactions at the institutional banking level, expanding UPI 123 Pay for feature phones, driving grassroots awareness campaigns to popularize voice-based and non-internet digital payments, ensuring total financial inclusion. Conclusion: to summarize, a cashless economy is not merely about convenience. It is the ultimate foundation of a transparent, modern, and accountable nation. India's fintech supremacy is proof of what can be achieved when innovation meets public accessibility. By securing our digital rails against cyber threats, we ensure our economic engine runs faster and fairer. Thank you. Topic 18. Media Ethics. Hook. Good morning, respected GTO and friends. Journalism was historically hailed as the fourth estate, a vital pillar tasked with speaking truth to power and safeguarding democracy. Yet, in an era dominated by clickbait algorithms and hyperpolarized primetime debates, the line between information and sensationalized entertainment has blurred dangerously. Today I will speak on media ethics, restoring credibility in the information age. Background. Media ethics encompasses the core principles of truthfulness, accuracy, objectivity, impartiality, and accountability that journalists must uphold. Historically rooted in the free press movements of the 19th and 20th centuries, journalism served as an objective public ledger. However, the commercial transition from subscription-based revenue models to high-velocity, digital advertisement-driven metrics altered the institutional incentives of the industry. Current situation. The current information landscape faces a profound credibility crisis. Mainstream television networks frequently substitute objective field reporting with highly polarized, studio-based shouting matches designed solely to maximize television rating points, TRPs. Simultaneously, the uncontrolled proliferation of digital news portals and social media aggregates has led to the mass circulation of unverified reports, deepfakes, and synthetic media, severely testing the public's trust in media institutions. Analysis. Media ethics is an indispensable component of national security and social cohesion. In a diverse democracy like India, irresponsible journalism that prioritizes sensational headlines over verified facts can trigger immediate law and order disruptions, communal polarization, and institutional distrust. When the media stops functioning as an objective watchdog and shifts into an ideological echo chamber, it compromises the public's ability to make informed democratic choices. Challenges. The attention economy trap. Digital platforms are commercially incentivized by engagement metrics. Shocking, polarizing, or sensational headlines generate higher clicks and ad revenues than nuanced, factual reporting. The rise of algorithmic deepfakes. The ease of creating highly realistic synthetic audio and video allows rogue actors to manufacture fake news that is exceptionally difficult for regular newsrooms to detect in real time. Corporate and political captivity. The concentration of media ownership within large conglomerates can create institutional conflicts of interest, occasionally suppressing critical investigative journalism. Way forward. Strengthening independent self-regulatory bodies. Empowering organizations like the News Broadcasting and Digital Standards Authority (NBDSA) and the Press Council of India, with real financial punitive powers to penalize deliberate ethical violations. Mandating fact-checking desks and provenance tools. Integrating AI-driven verification software within newsrooms to systematically authenticate user-generated video and image feeds before broadcast. Promoting citizen-led media literacy. Embedding critical digital media literacy within high school and university curricula to train the public to identify biased narratives and unverified rumors. Conclusion. To conclude, freedom of the press is a vital democratic right, but it cannot be detached from absolute professional responsibility. The media must remember that its primary allegiance is to the citizens, not the advertisers. By restoring accuracy, objectivity, and empathy to reporting, journalism can reclaim its role as the true custodian of democratic truth. Thank you. Topic 19. Energy Crisis. Hook. Good morning, everyone. A nation's industrial velocity is directly determined by its energy security. As the world faces geopolitical supply shocks and the severe impacts of climate change, the challenge is no longer just generating power. It is executing a rapid transition toward a green, self-reliant energy architecture. Today, my topic is the energy crisis, strategic imperatives, and India's renewable revolution. Background. Historically, global economic stability was anchored entirely by fossil fuels, coal, oil, and natural gas. India's industrial growth was built on domestic coal reserves and a high dependency on imported crude oil, primarily from the Middle East. However, this reliance left the domestic economy exposed to international price shocks, foreign currency drains, and severe environmental vulnerabilities. Current situation. India has engineered a profound energy transition. Moving through 2026, India's total installed renewable energy capacity has scaled past an impressive 263 gigawatts, meaning the country has achieved over 51.5% of its total cumulative power capacity from non-fossil fuel sources, hitting its conditional NDC targets well ahead of the 2030 schedule. Massive flagship programs like the PM Surya Ghar, Muft Bijli Yojana, backed by a 75,021 crore rupees outlay, have successfully solarized millions of households, while the National Green Hydrogen Mission is actively setting up production plants to decarbonize heavy industrial sectors. Analysis. The energy crisis requires balancing two critical vectors: maintaining immediate industrial power availability while driving long-term carbon reduction. While adding capacity is a triumph, the generation share of renewables remains at approximately 22% due to grid integration challenges. As industrial demand grows due to deep data center expansion and the electrification of mobility, developing advanced energy storage systems, like pumped hydro projects and battery energy storage systems, BES, is essential to transform variable green energy into stable power. India's power mix success, 2026. Non-fossil installed cap renewable generation share, 51.5%. Target exceeded, approximately 22%. Storage push needed. Challenges. The high intermittency grid challenge, solar and wind power, are naturally weather-dependent. Without massive grid-scale battery storage infrastructure, rapid solar input shifts can trigger critical power grid instabilities. Critical mineral supply dependencies. Transitioning to green tech requires vast reserves of lithium, cobalt, and rare earth elements. The global supply chains for these minerals are heavily controlled by a single nation, China, creating new geopolitical vulnerabilities. Financial stress of state discoms. The poor financial health and high billing losses of state-level electricity distribution companies slow down modern grid infrastructure upgrades. Way forward. Massive acceleration of energy storage systems. Rapidly executing the planned 94 gigawatts of pumped storage projects and scaling BESS installations to store surplus daytime solar energy for peak evening use. Deepening domestic solar and battery PLI schemes, ensuring 100% backward integration of solar cell and module manufacturing to eliminate import reliance on foreign hardware. Modernizing smart grid infrastructure, deploying AI-driven smart grids capable of dynamically rerouting power loads in real time, effectively balancing intermittent renewable inputs. Conclusion. To summarize, the energy crisis is both an existential challenge and an unprecedented strategic opportunity. India's aggressive march towards solar, wind, and green hydrogen proves that economic growth can be aligned with environmental sustainability. By securing our green energy supply chains and building advanced storage infrastructure, we guarantee India's long-term industrial autonomy. Thank you. Topic 20. India as a global power. Hook. Good morning, GTO and my friends. The geopolitical center of gravity has decisively shifted toward the Indo-Pacific, And at the absolute center of this transformation sits a resurgent India, no longer a passive balancing power, but a leading global force shaping international rules. Today I stand before you to speak on India as a global power, directing the multipolar world order. Background: following independence, India's foreign policy was defined by strategic autonomy and the Non-Aligned Movement, NAM, focusing on post-colonial solidarity while preserving its domestic economic growth from Cold War proxy rivalries. While this policy protected our early choices, the expansion of our economic footprint after the 1991 reforms, combined with our verified nuclear status, set the stage for India to transition into a proactive global decision-maker. Current situation: moving through 2026, India projects comprehensive national power across multiple fronts. Economically, it stands firm as the world's fastest-growing major economy. Diplomatic flagships, such as leading the inclusion of the African Union into the permanent G20 framework and expanding its influence across BRICS Plus and the Quad, demonstrate India's unique role as the primary bridge between the global East and West and the North and South. Furthermore, with defense exports touching an all-time high of over 38,400 crore rupees, India is transforming into a primary security provider for the Indo-Pacific. Analysis: India's rise to global power status is built on a distinct combination of hard power and soft power. Hard power pillars: a modernizing blue water navy securing critical Indian Ocean choke points, a booming domestic space sector led by ISRO's lunar and solar achievements, and a rapidly expanding semiconductor and electronics manufacturing ecosystem. Soft power pillars: exporting digital public infrastructure, DPI, like UPI, to developing economies, positioning the nation as a first responder during humanitarian crises, HADR operations, and championing climate justice through the International Solar Alliance. Challenges: active continental border pressures, managing complex, long-standing territorial disputes along land boundaries, the LAC and LOC, requires the continuous commitment of massive military and financial resources. Critical industrial deficits: while India excels at software and services, achieving complete self-reliance in advanced manufacturing inputs, such as precision machinery, aerospace alloys, and high-end semiconductors, remains an active challenge. The trade deficit paradox: maintaining balanced economic interactions with manufacturing superpowers while building domestic alternative supply chains requires careful macroeconomic management. Way forward: accelerating strategic manufacturing self-reliance, fully executing the national semiconductor mission, and expanding domestic defense corridors to lock in complete industrial autonomy. Expanding naval presence and port alliances, deepening strategic infrastructure partnerships at critical maritime nodes, such as Sabang in Indonesia and Chabahar in Iran, to secure long-range maritime routes. Championing multilateral institutional reform, continuing to drive text-based negotiations for the democratization and expansion of the United Nations Security Council to accurately reflect modern realities. Conclusion: to conclude, India's ascent as a global power is not driven by expansionist ambitions but by a commitment to global stability, inclusive progress, and mutual respect. Guided by the philosophy of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the world is one family, a stronger India is the ultimate guarantee of a balanced, free, and democratic world order. Thank you. Topic 1. Inflation. Hook. Good morning, respected GTO and my dear friends. A famous economic adage states that inflation is taxation without legislation. It is the silent thief that doesn't steal from your wallet physically, but systematically erodes the purchasing power of the money inside it. Today, I stand before you to speak on inflation, the dynamic economic challenge shaping India's growth narrative. Background: inflation is the rate at which the general level of prices for goods and services rises, subsequently causing currency purchasing power to fall. Historically measured via the Wholesale Price Index, WPI, and the Consumer Price Index, CPI, India's inflation has long been volatile, heavily impacted by monsoon uncertainties and global oil shocks. To bring institutional stability, the Government of India mandated the Reserve Bank of India, RBI, in 2016 to maintain a flexible inflation targeting framework of 4%, with a tolerance band of plus or minus 2%. Current situation: India's retail inflation has hovered under the central bank's medium-term midpoint threshold, registering at 3.93% before experiencing marginal upward pressure toward 4.25% due to global energy disruptions and regional transport supply constraints. To keep public expectations anchored, the RBI has deployed targeted tools like the Household Inflation Expectations Survey across major cities. Concurrently, the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, MOSPI, has rolled out an updated CPI series based on recent household consumption expenditure surveys, reducing food weights to more accurately reflect modern Indian consumption. Analysis. Inflation is a multidimensional indicator reflecting a balancing act between demand pull factors, growing consumer income, and cost push pressures, global supply anomalies. For a growing economy like India, a mild inflation rate of 3% to 4% is healthy, as it signals robust demand and incentivizes manufacturing investment. However, when supply constraints, such as geopolitical flare-ups affecting oil imports or fertilizer costs, drive food and fuel inflation up, it functions as a regressive tax, directly squeezing lower-income households and dragging down real GDP growth by curtailing discretionary spending. Challenges: volatile external commodity dependencies. India remains exposed to international supply shocks, where sudden crude oil and liquefied petroleum gas (LPG) spikes automatically elevate domestic transport costs, spilling over into general commodity prices. The imported fertilizer and food puzzle. Disruptions in key agricultural inputs directly impact crop cultivation costs, causing sudden food price volatility that is difficult to curb via domestic monetary policy alone. The monetary policy dilemma. If the RBI raises interest rates to aggressively curb inflation, it increases borrowing costs for businesses, potentially slowing industrial expansion and job creation. Way forward: diversifying strategic energy reserves, accelerating oil and gas sourcing from alternative non-conflict regions, while rapidly expanding domestic green energy grids to reduce exposure to international fuel shocks. Upgrading agri-logistics infrastructure, strengthening cold chain storage and direct-to-market links to minimize seasonal food supply gluts and shortages, stabilizing food prices. Calibrated fiscal monetary coordination, using targeted government supply interventions, like releasing state grain buffers, alongside RBI's interest rate fine-tuning to manage core prices without choking industrial growth. Conclusion. To conclude, maintaining stable low inflation is the absolute bedrock of a predictable, thriving economy. India's institutional resilience in keeping inflation balanced despite global turbulence is a testament to sharp macroeconomic management. By boosting domestic manufacturing, self-reliance, and securing our supply chains, we ensure India's growth remains both fast and fair. Thank you. Topic 2. Role of media. Hook. Good morning, gentlemen. In the theater of modern democracy, information is the primary currency of the citizen. The media was historically hailed as the fourth estate, a vital watchdog tasked with holding power accountable. Yet, when newsrooms trade investigative journalism for algorithmic clickbait, the watchdog risks turning into a megaphone for polarization. Today, my topic is the role of media, safeguarding truth in the digital age. Background. The traditional mandate of the media is built on the core ethical pillars of accuracy, objectivity, impartiality, and public accountability. Historically, from printing nationalist newspapers during India's freedom struggle to executing deep investigative exposures in the late 20th century, journalism served as the primary repository of public trust. However, the commercial transition from reader-funded subscription models to ad-driven attention models altered the fundamental incentives of the industry. Current situation. We are currently navigating a highly fractured information landscape. Mainstream television networks often substitute ground-level investigative reporting with high-decibel, studio-anchored debates engineered strictly to maximize television rating points, TRPs. Concurrently, the mass proliferation of digital news aggregates and social media domains has democratized content creation but unleashed an unmanaged wave of unverified reports, synthetic deepfakes, and algorithmic confirmation biases that confuse the public sphere. Analysis. The media is a critical component of national security and social cohesion. In a vast, diverse democracy like India, irresponsible journalism that prioritizes sensational headlines over verified facts can trigger immediate law and order disruptions, communal polarization, and systemic institutional distrust. Conversely, an ethical media serves as a constructive bridge, amplifying the concerns of marginalized communities, exposing administrative inefficiencies, and educating the citizenry on crucial national policies, thereby strengthening democratic checks and balances. Challenges. The commercial engagement trap. Digital media platforms are financially incentivized by click metrics. Polarizing, sensationalized, or highly charged content inherently generates higher digital engagement and advertisement revenue than nuanced factual reporting. The threat of synthetic misinformation. The rapid democratization of advanced AI generation tools allows rogue actors to manufacture highly convincing fake audio and video, outpacing the verification capabilities of standard newsrooms. Institutional capture and echo chambers. The concentration of media ownership within large corporate conglomerates risks creating structural conflicts of interest, leading to selective narrative building and the erosion of editorial independence. Way forward. Empowering independent self-regulatory bodies, granting substantial punitive and financial enforcement powers to organizations like the News Broadcasting and Digital Standards Authority, NBDSA, to penalize clear ethical violations. Mandatory fact verification infrastructure. Institutionalizing AI-driven fact-checking and media provenance tools within all major digital and broadcast newsrooms to verify content before publication. Promoting citizen-led media literacy, embedding critical digital information literacy into educational curricula to train citizens to identify biased content and cross-verify viral claims before sharing. Conclusion: to summarize, a free democracy cannot survive without a free press, but a free press cannot maintain its freedom without absolute professional responsibility. The media must pivot back to its primary allegiance, the citizen. By prioritizing objective truth over sensational ratings, journalism can reclaim its vital role as the true custodian of democratic transparency. Thank you. Topic 3: Women Empowerment. Hook. Good morning, respected GTO and friends. Swami Vivekananda once noted that it is impossible to think about the welfare of the world unless the condition of women is improved, for a bird cannot fly on only one wing. True nation building is not about granting concessions. It is about systematically removing structural barriers so that half of our national population can lead from the front. Today I will speak on women empowerment, the catalyst for India's global ascent. Background. Historically, women empowerment in India was treated primarily as a welfare-centric issue, focused on micro-interventions in health and primary literacy. Decades of patriarchal socio-cultural norms, restrictive legal frameworks regarding property, and safety vulnerabilities limited women's participation in the formal workforce and political leadership, creating a sharp gender gap that constrained the nation's true economic and social potential. Current situation. India has executed a profound, rights-based strategic shift toward women-led development. The legislative landscape is anchored by the historic operationalization of the Nari Shakti Vandan Adhiniyam, mandating a 33% reservation for women in the Lok Sabha and state legislative assemblies. Economically, over 70% of loans under the Pradhan Mantri Mudra Yojana have been secured by women entrepreneurs. Furthermore, institutional shifts are clear across the defense sector, where women officers are now securing permanent commissions, graduating from the National Defense Academy (NDA), and successfully commanding operational combat units and flying supersonic fighter jets. Analysis. Women empowerment is an absolute macroeconomic and operational necessity. According to global financial metrics, closing the gender employment gap could expand India's GDP growth rate significantly. In modern knowledge economies, corporate spaces, and high-tech military commands, capability is entirely gender-neutral. By ensuring complete financial integration, robust digital literacy, and equal asset ownership, the nation transitions women from passive beneficiaries of state packages into active architects of the economy. Pillars of modern women, LED development. Political agency, economic autonomy. 33% legislative res, 70%, plus mudra entrepreneurship. Challenges. Low female labor force participation. While rural agricultural engagement is high, the urban formal sector continues to experience structural dropouts due to a lack of institutional safe mobility and childcare infrastructure. The grassroots implementation gap. Despite strict laws against domestic violence and workplace harassment, reporting mechanisms remain slow, and deep-seated cultural biases persist in remote regions. The proxy leadership trap. In local self-governments, panchayats, elected women representatives are occasionally sidelined by male family members acting as proxies, panchayat patis, diluting real political empowerment. Way forward. Mandating workplace support infrastructure. Strictly enforcing corporate and public sector safe transit policies alongside accessible, high-quality daycare facilities to prevent career dropouts. Enforcing strict capacity building for elected leaders. Conducting continuous institutional administrative training for newly elected women legislators to eliminate the practice of proxy governance. Accelerating STEM financial incentives, providing targeted scholarships, incubation grants, and low-interest venture capital to women-led startups in science, engineering, and deep tech fields. Conclusion. To conclude, women empowerment is no longer a choice. It is the definitive driver of our national destiny. The transition from women's development to women-led development proves that India recognizes the true strength of its demography. When women lead, families thrive, communities innovate, and the nation becomes truly unstoppable. Thank you. Topic 4. Indian Railways. Hook. Good morning, everyone. spanning over 68,000 route kilometers, transporting over 22 million passengers daily, and carrying over 1.5 billion tons of freight annually. Indian Railways is not just an industrial transport network. It is the vital economic lifeline of the nation. Today my topic is Indian Railways, transforming the lifeline of the nation into a world-class infrastructure powerhouse. Background: inherited from the British colonial administration, Indian Railways was historically organized around basic troop movements and raw material extraction. Post-independence, it served as a critical social vehicle, but suffered for decades from a lack of long-term capital investment. The system faced heavily congested trunk routes, an unsustainable model where high freight tariffs subsidized low passenger fares, low operational speeds, and persistent passenger safety challenges due to legacy signaling infrastructure. Current situation: Indian Railways is experiencing an unprecedented high-tech overhaul. The Union budget has allocated a record-shattering capital expenditure outlay of 2.93 lakh rupees crore explicitly for the modernization of rail infrastructure. The Ministry of Railways has prioritized three strategic pillars: high-speed connectivity, freight optimization, and safety acceleration. Key developments include the phased rollouts of the Vande Bharat and Amrit Bharat fleets, the deployment of the indigenous Kavach automatic train protection, ATP safety system across thousands of kilometers, and the formal announcement of 7 new high-speed rail corridors, including the South High-Speed Triangle linking Chennai, Bengaluru, and Hyderabad, spanning nearly 4,000 kilometers. Analysis: the current modernization push directly addresses India's macroeconomic goal of reducing high national logistics costs from between 13% and 14% of GDP down to single digits. By aggressively expanding the dedicated freight corridors, DFCs, the railways can rapidly move heavy cargo away from congested passenger lines, doubling freight speeds and shifting cargo transport back from roads to fuel-efficient rail. This modernization turns the network from an expensive, slow-state utility into a high-speed engine of regional development and economic connectivity. Challenges: high operating ratio stress. The operating ratio, the cost incurred to earn every 100 rupees, remains high at approximately 98.4%, leaving limited internal revenue surpluses and requiring heavy reliance on central government budget support. The over-reliance on bulk commodities. Nearly 84% of rail freight revenue is skewed toward bulk goods like coal, cement, and iron ore. With the long-term national transition toward renewable energy, the projected decline in coal transport presents a future revenue risk that requires rapid cargo diversification. Grassroots civic sense and vandalism. Despite the installation of modern train sets and redeveloped smart stations, public littering, stone pelting incidents, and intentional damage to state property present a continuous maintenance burden. Way forward: aggressive diversification into non-bulk freight, modifying wagon designs, and introducing strict timetabled delivery schedules to capture high-value, light cargo sectors like e-commerce, pharmaceuticals, and FMCG. Fast-tracking total Kavach deployment. Scaling up manufacturing and installation pipelines to ensure the Kavach anti-collision system covers the entire national network to permanently eliminate human error rail accidents. Institutionalizing public-private partnerships, PPP. Leveraging private sector capital for station redevelopment, commercial real estate utilization near rail hubs, and advanced rolling stock manufacturing to lower the financial burden on the state exchequer. Conclusion: to summarize, the modernization of Indian Railways is a vivid reflection of India's march toward Viksit Bharat. By replacing legacy networks with high-speed corridors, advanced automatic safety tech, and optimized freight paths, the railways are successfully building a faster, safer, and cleaner future. A world-class railway network guarantees a highly competitive and invulnerable Indian economy. Thank you. Topic 1. India-US Relations. Hook. Good morning, respected GTO and my dear friends. A partnership once famously described as an alliance of, quote, hesitant neighbors during the Cold War has transformed into the world's most consequential, indispensable strategic relationship of the 21st century. Today I stand before you to speak on India-US relations, the definitive comprehensive global strategic partnership. Background: historically, the relationship was fractured by Cold War dynamics, where the U.S. leaned toward Pakistan, and India signed the 1971 Friendship Treaty with the USSR. Relations bottomed out post-1998 Pokhran II nuclear tests, when the U.S. imposed heavy economic sanctions. However, the foundational turning point came with the 2005 to 2008 civil nuclear deal under George W. Bush, which officially recognized India's unique nuclear status despite being a non-signatory to the NPT, setting the stage for deep alignment. Current situation: the relationship has scaled to unprecedented heights with the signing of a landmark interim trade agreement, which dramatically restructured tariffs between the two nations and committed to massive mutual purchases in sectors like agriculture, critical minerals, and semiconductors. Bilateral trade is poised to cross $200 billion. On the technology front, the ICET, Initiative on Critical and Emerging Technology, framework is executing deep integrations, including the domestic co-production of the GEF 414 jet engine in India, joint space ventures, and the ethical scaling of artificial intelligence data centers and graphics processing units, GPUs. Analysis: the India-US equation is anchored by the shared strategic imperative of managing a rising, aggressive China in the Indo-Pacific. Defense ties are backed by a 10-year Master Defense Partnership, MDP framework, and the signing of all 4 foundational logistics agreements, LEMOA, CUMCASA, BICA, ISA. The Malabar naval drills and multi-domain operations like Yudh Abhyas have achieved flawless interoperability. However, despite intense defense and technology integration, India maintains its strict stance of strategic autonomy, explicitly refusing a formal military alliance, which preserves its independent foreign policy maneuvering space. India-US strategic pillars: security and defense high-tech integration, MDP framework, Quad, BECA ICET, GPU/semiconductors. Challenges: the energy and sanctions disconnect. India's pragmatic reliance on diversified energy sourcing, including oil shipments from Russia, frequently faces political and legal friction from Washington's unilateral sanctions frameworks. Visa and workforce impediments: strict operational ceilings on H-1B visas create continuous logistical friction for the Indian IT industry and highly skilled professionals. The non-MNA status paradox: the U.S. occasionally pushes for deep defense integration that challenges India's strict non-major non-NATO ally position, requiring careful diplomatic balancing. Way forward: finalizing the comprehensive BTA, promptly converting the interim trade agreement into a full-fledged bilateral trade agreement, BTA, to completely remove remaining non-tariff barriers on medical devices and ICT goods. Institutionalizing the trust framework, deepening the ICET program to secure alternative, resilient supply chains for semiconductors, high-end sensors, and rare earth materials, completely bypassing East Asian monopolies. Expanding joint maritime domain awareness, maximizing the Compact initiative within the Quad, to provide continuous maritime tracking for smaller Indo-Pacific littoral states to maintain regional stability. Conclusion: to conclude, India-US relations have successfully transitioned into an unshakable future-proof alliance. It is a partnership driven by common values, integrated technologies, and mutual geopolitical protections. By maintaining its strategic autonomy while accelerating high-tech defense ties, India guarantees its economic growth and its pivotal role as the ultimate anchor of regional peace. Thank you. Topic 2: India-Pakistan relations. Hook. Good morning, gentlemen. Two neighbors sharing a deeply intertwined 3,323-kilometer border, bound by a common cultural heritage, yet perpetually frozen in a state of intense strategic hostility. Today my topic is India-Pakistan relations, navigating the complex realities of border security and state-sponsored proxies. Background: rooted in the violent 1947 partition, driven by the two-nation theory, the relationship has been defined by mistrust and 4 major military conflicts: 1947, 1965, 1971, and 1999. The relationship underwent a permanent, dangerous transformation following the nuclearization of the subcontinent in 1998. Since 1989, Pakistan's Inter-Services Intelligence (ISI) has utilized cross-border proxy warfare as a tool of asymmetric containment against India, completely shifting India's approach toward a hardline stance of defensive retaliation. Current situation: bilateral relations remain practically non-existent, characterized by a prolonged freeze on direct trade and diplomatic engagement following India's 2019 constitutional integration of Jammu and Kashmir and the recent escalation loops. Broader regional frictions persist, with Pakistan deeply embroiled in cross-border clashes with the Taliban along its Afghan frontier and fighting local insurgencies like the Baloch Liberation Army (BLA). Despite extreme diplomatic estrangement, a unique paradox remains visible. The core parameters of the 2021 ceasefire along the Line of Control (LOC) remain functionally maintained on the ground, even as both sides navigate profound economic and political turbulence. Analysis. India's foreign policy toward Islamabad has successfully shifted the paradigm from passive defense to punitive deterrence. By enforcing diplomatic isolation on Pakistan across international forums and demanding an absolute end to cross-border terrorism as a non-negotiable prerequisite for dialogue, New Delhi has decoupled its global rise from the hyphenated India-Pakistan dynamic. Pakistan's deep, expanding defense alignment with China, marked by the deployment of Chinese hardware along our western border and the operationalization of the CPEC corridor through Indian-claimed territory, means India must continuously prepare for a complex, dual-front military calculus. Challenges: the hybrid warfare network. The continuous mutation of state-sponsored proxy outfits into decentralized cyber-sabotage units and the use of micro-drones for cross-border narcotics and weapons smuggling. The suspension of diplomatic safety valves. The suspension of traditional communication frameworks, such as the temporary halts to the Indus Waters Treaty reviews, removes the traditional crisis insulation mechanisms between two nuclear-armed states. Political fragmentation in Islamabad. The lack of a stable, unified civilian leadership in Pakistan leaves the ultimate command structure in the hands of the military establishment, making any durable, long-term diplomatic breakthrough highly unstable. Way forward. Securing the western border layer. Accelerating the installation of the Comprehensive Integrated Border Management System, CIBMS, deploying ground sensors, thermal cameras, and anti-drone laser nets to permanently neutralize infiltration loops. Leveraging asymmetric economic pressure. Utilizing India's leadership within the Financial Action Task Force, FATF, and the UNSC 1267 Sanctions Committee to maintain absolute global blockades against terror financing networks. Keeping the door open for low-level technical contact. Maintaining low-key, non-political coordination via the Directors General of Military Operations, DGMO, and the Indus Water Commissioners to prevent minor field accidents from escalating into full-scale crises. Conclusion. To summarize, India's policy toward Pakistan must reject naive optimism. Our stance must remain firm. Talks and terror cannot go together. By maintaining a position of absolute military readiness and driving forward our domestic economic engine, India ensures that its national sovereignty remains uncompromised by Western border adventurism. Thank you. Topic 3. India-Russia relations. Hook. Good morning, respected GTO and friends. While international alliances frequently shift with prevailing political winds, the strategic equation between New Delhi and Moscow has stood as a rock of absolute reliability for nearly 8 decades. Today, I will speak on India-Russia relations, the time-tested special and privileged strategic partnership. Background. Formally established in April 1947, the bilateral relationship matured during the height of the Cold War. When Western powers pressured India during the 1971 war, the Soviet Union signed the historic Treaty of Peace, Friendship and Cooperation, deploying its naval fleet to shield India from external intervention. For decades, the USSR and subsequently the Russian Federation served as the exclusive foundation of India's military infrastructure, transferring core technologies for advanced platforms like the T-90 tanks, Sukhoi 30 Mki fighter jets, and the Kudankulam nuclear power plant. Current situation. The relationship operates at a record high, driven by pragmatic economic adjustments. Bilateral trade has surged to an all-time high of $60 billion, with both nations actively implementing a joint roadmap to hit $100 billion by 2030. India has successfully institutionalized energy security by importing Russian crude under local currency mechanisms, while expanding logistics corridors via the International North-South Transport Corridor, INSTC, and the Northern Sea Route. Concurrently, both nations are driving joint security operations, co-chairing the India-Russia Joint Working Group on Counterterrorism to address regional radicalization risks. India-Russia Core Axis, 2026. Economic Velocity Strategic Framework, $60 billion trade, target $100 billion 2030, INSTC, Counterterror, Energy. Analysis. India's engagement with Russia is a masterclass in maintaining strategic autonomy. Despite intense pressure from Western economies to isolate Moscow due to continental conflicts, India has prioritized its national interest, securing affordable energy to insulate domestic consumers from global inflation shocks. For India, a strong, stable relationship with Russia is essential to maintain a balanced multipolar Asia, preventing Moscow from sliding into an asymmetric dependent embrace with Beijing, which would compromise the regional balance of power. Challenges: the rupee-ruble settlement imbalance. The massive surge in India's oil imports has led to an accumulation of Indian rupees in Russian banks, requiring rapid diversification into alternative manufacturing and investment avenues to clear trade accounts. Defense supply chain delays. Russia's prolonged internal industrial commitments have caused delays in the delivery of critical spare parts and advanced air defense components, like the final S-400 regiments, forcing India to accelerate alternative indigenization. Navigating Western sanctions regimes. Managing cross-border banking operations and shipping logistics without falling afoul of secondary Western banking sanctions presents a continuous compliance challenge. Way forward: diversifying bilateral imports. Expanding Russian purchases into critical fertilizers, coking coal, vegetable oils, and high-tech civilian machinery to naturally balance the lopsided trade deficit. Fast-tracking Chennai-Vladivostok maritime route, operationalizing the Eastern Maritime Corridor to cut transit times from Europe to Asia by 40%, boosting trade velocity through India's eastern ports. Accelerating joint ventures under Make in India, transitioning away from direct military purchases toward full domestic joint manufacturing, such as the AK-203 rifle production project in Amithi, ensuring technology transfer remains uninterrupted. Conclusion. To conclude, the time-tested friendship between India and Russia remains a vital pillar of global stability. It is a partnership built on mutual trust, civilizational dialogue, and deep respect for each other's national interests. By keeping this unique legacy strong while actively modernizing our economic ties, India secures its energy borders and its strategic position in a multipolar world. Thank you. Topic 4. India and neighboring countries. Hook. Good morning, everyone. You can choose your friends, but you cannot choose your neighbors. For a nation aspiring to be a true global power, its international status is determined by how effectively it manages its immediate geopolitical backyard. Today, my topic is India and neighboring countries, the strategic realities of the neighborhood-first policy. Background: India shares over 15,000 kilometers of land borders and a 7,516-kilometer coastline with 7 immediate neighbors. Historically, India's approach was occasionally criticized for being overly Delhi-centric, leaving a diplomatic vacuum that allowed an expansionist China to aggressively penetrate the region through checkbook diplomacy, the Belt and Road Initiative (BRI), and long-term infrastructure debt traps. To counter this, India executed a profound structural shift, launching the neighborhood-first policy to reposition the nation as the primary economic and security anchor of South Asia. Current situation: the regional landscape is highly dynamic and complex. India has successfully positioned itself as a reliable first responder, providing massive, unconditional economic support to Sri Lanka during its financial crisis, delivering vital energy assistance to Bangladesh, and building deep security integration with Bhutan and Nepal. However, challenges persist. China continues to actively court regional regimes, expanding its maritime footprint via research vessel deployments in the Indian Ocean and maintaining security linkages with the military regime in Myanmar and the leadership in Maldives, creating a continuous geopolitical chess match. Analysis: India's neighborhood strategy relies on 2 distinct structural pillars: asymmetric economic generosity and maritime security leadership. Economic generosity: India does not demand strict reciprocity from smaller neighbors. Instead, it focuses on building physical cross-border infrastructure, such as the India-Myanmar-Thailand Trilateral Highway, cross-border power transmission lines with Nepal, and integrated checkpoints (ICPs) to facilitate smooth regional trade. Security leadership: utilizing platforms like the BIMSTEC and the Colombo Security Conclave to build shared counter-piracy, disaster management (HADR), and maritime domain awareness operations, positioning India as the natural net security provider. Challenges: China's deepening debt trap expansionism. Hostile actors exploit the financial vulnerabilities of smaller states to secure long-range strategic assets, such as the lease of deep water ports, e.g., Hambantota, that can be dual-utilized for military intelligence. Political instability and regime swings. Sudden, volatile changes in domestic regimes across neighboring states often alter their foreign policy leanings, demanding continuous diplomatic adjustments from New Delhi. Transnational security vulnerabilities. Fragmented governance in neighboring zones, such as the ongoing civil unrest in Myanmar, spills across borders in the form of illegal arms smuggling, narcotics networks, and migration pressures. Way forward. Accelerating institutional execution. Under-promise, over-deliver. Setting up dedicated, fast-track project management units to complete regional connectivity projects ahead of schedule, proving that Indian infrastructure is faster and fairer than foreign alternatives. expanding digital public infrastructure, DPI, exporting UPI networks and digital governance platforms to all SAARC and BIMSTEC partners to deeply integrate regional commerce with the Indian mainland, strengthening sub-regional groupings, focusing intense diplomatic capital on BBIN, Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Nepal, and BIMSTEC to completely bypass the structural bottlenecks that have permanently paralyzed SAARC. Conclusion. To summarize, a peaceful, stable, and integrated neighborhood is the absolute foundation of India's global ascent. By driving robust cross-border connectivity, respecting regional sovereignty, and acting as a dependable security anchor, India's Neighborhood First policy successfully counters external expansionism. A secure periphery guarantees a strong, prosperous India. Thank you. Topic 5. BRICS. Hook. Good morning, respected GTO and my dear friends. Born as a catching financial acronym, it has mutated into a massive geopolitical counterweight, representing over 45% of the global population, and directly outstripping the G7 in global purchasing power parity. Today, I stand before you to speak on BRICS, redefining the architecture of global economic governance. Background. Formed in 2006 by Brazil, Russia, India, and China, with South Africa joining in 2011, BRICS was engineered to challenge the Western-dominated post-World War II Bretton Woods financial system managed by the IMF and World Bank. The core mandate was to amplify the diplomatic voice of emerging markets and developing countries, EMDCs, demand structural voting reforms in global banking, and build independent economic channels. Current situation. Under India's BRICS chairship running under the guiding theme, Building for Resilience, Innovation, Cooperation, and Sustainability, the expanding bloc operates at maximum global velocity. India has successfully launched new priority tracks focusing on exporting digital public infrastructure, DPI, and integrating mental health wellness across member states. The group is actively executing regional development loans via the New Development Bank, NDB, while establishing local currency settlement mechanisms to bypass Western transactional vulnerabilities. Analysis. BRICS provides India with an essential platform to balance its foreign policy alignments. While India expands its maritime and high-tech coordination with Western democracies through the Quad, its leadership in BRICS anchors its status as the undisputed leader of the Global South. It allows New Delhi to ensure that the ongoing transition toward a multipolar world order remains development-centric and completely inclusive, rather than becoming dominated by any single country's political interests. Challenges. Internal geopolitical incongruence. The deepest structural vulnerability within the group is the ongoing bilateral friction between India and China. While India champions BRICS as a non-Western developmental forum, Beijing routinely attempts to weaponize the expanded alliance into an explicitly anti-Western tool. The common currency divergence. Certain members push for the rapid creation of a unified BRICS currency to force de-dollarization, whereas India maintains a cautious, pragmatic stance, prioritizing national currency settlements like the rupee dirham or rupee ruble trade over a volatile shared currency. Heterogeneous economic policies. Managing synchronized custom protocols and common trade guidelines across an expanded list of economies with wildly differing regulatory environments presents immense administrative friction. Way forward. Strengthening the financial autonomy of the NDB. Expanding the capital base of the New Development Bank to act as a resilient alternate source for infrastructure funding across developing countries, without imposing harsh domestic adjustments. Exporting Indian DPI frameworks. Using the BRICS platform to export India's highly successful digital tools, like UPI, ONDC, and COIN, to accelerate economic formalization across member nations. Enforcing strict consensus expansion G. Exporting Indian DPI frameworks. Using the BRICS platform to export India's highly successful digital tools like UPI, ONDC, and COIN to accelerate economic formalization across member nations. Enforcing strict consensus expansion guidelines. Mandating that all future structural entries of partner states remain firmly tied to the transparent criteria set at the Kazan and Johannesburg summits to prevent internal policy dilution. Conclusion. To conclude, BRICS is the living reality of a multipolar world. Despite internal divergences, it remains a powerful vehicle for global economic democratization. By continuing to drive its development-focused agenda, India can ensure BRICS remains a force for global equity, inclusive innovation, and shared stability. Thank you. Topic 6. ASEAN, Association of Southeast Asian Nations. Hook. Good morning, gentlemen. 10 diverse nations, home to nearly 700 million people, sitting strategically at the absolute crossroads of global maritime trade, yet constantly walking a tightrope between competing superpowers. Today, my topic is ASEAN, navigating regional integration amid geopolitical crosscurrents. Background. Established in 1967 with the signing of the Bangkok Declaration during the height of the Cold War, ASEAN was conceptualized to foster economic growth, social progress, and regional stability. Guided by the unique principle of the ASEAN Way, defined by absolute non-interference in domestic affairs, consensus-based decision-making, and peaceful dispute resolution, the bloc successfully turned a formerly unstable region into a cohesive trading powerhouse. Current situation. The Philippines holds the ASEAN chairship under the theme, Navigating Our Future Together, guiding high-stakes regional agendas through 3 core pillars: peace and security anchors, prosperity corridors, and people empowerment. High-level regional meetings are heavily focused on accelerating the ASEAN submarine power cable framework to coordinate green energy transmission across the bloc, while simultaneously addressing intense regional food security and maritime supply chain vulnerabilities stemming from external global tensions. ASEAN 2026 Strategic Levers. Maritime Security Economic Integration, Code of Conduct, SCS, Push Submarine Cable Grid, PLI. Analysis. For India, ASEAN is the absolute cornerstone of our Act East policy and our broader Indo-Pacific maritime architecture. The relationship, upgraded to a comprehensive strategic partnership, is vital to balance the expanding economic and military footprint of China in Southeast Asia. Deepening ties via the ASEAN-India Free Trade Agreement, AIFTA review, and expanding joint naval maneuvers like the AIM exercises enables India to build an integrated strategic buffer, ensuring the vital sea lines of communication remain completely free and open. Challenges. The consensus conundrum on external security, the ASEAN Way requirement for absolute unanimity, occasionally paralyzes the bloc. Member states with heavy economic dependencies on Beijing frequently block strong, unified collective statements regarding maritime border incursions. The ongoing Myanmar crisis. The prolonged internal instability and civil conflict in Myanmar present a continuous challenge to ASEAN's regional credibility, straining its principle of non-interference while causing cross-border migration pressures. Superpower entrapment pressures. The intensifying strategic competition between Washington and Beijing forces Southeast Asian nations into a highly volatile balancing act, risking internal divisions within the bloc. Way forward. Accelerating the review of the AIFTA, streamlining trade regulations, and removing non-tariff barriers to make India-ASEAN supply chains resilient against global manufacturing shocks. Pivoting to minilateral security formats. Supplementing ASEAN-wide dialogue by building deep, operational trilateral and quadrilateral security links with highly aligned littoral states like Vietnam, the Philippines, and Singapore. Driving grassroots digital connectivity. Exporting India's fintech architectures and digital public goods to integrate small and medium enterprises across Southeast Asia with the Indian economic mainland. Conclusion. To summarize, ASEAN's unity and strategic independence are absolutely critical for the balance of power in Asia. India must remain a steadfast, reliable partner, backing ASEAN centrality with tangible economic infrastructure and uncompromised maritime capacity building. A strong, united ASEAN guarantees a secure and prosperous Indo-Pacific. Thank you. Topic 7. South China Sea. Hook. Good morning, respected GTO and friends. A maritime expanse is processing over 1/3 of global shipping wealth, rich in untapped energy reserves, yet transformed into a high-stakes geopolitical powder keg where unilateral island building directly challenges the established laws of the oceans. Today, I will speak on the South China Sea, the maritime core of Indo-Pacific security friction. Background. The South China Sea is a marginal sea part of the Pacific Ocean, encompassing an area from the Singapore and Malacca Straits to the Strait of Taiwan. The modern conflict stems from China's expansive, unilateral historical claim over nearly 90% of the waters via the arbitrary 9-dash line. This claim directly encroaches upon the exclusive economic zones, EEZs, of several ASEAN littoral states, including the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, and Brunei. Despite the 2016 Permanent Court of Arbitration ruling completely invalidating the legal basis of the 9-dash line, Beijing has aggressively continued its maritime expansion. Current situation. The maritime theater experiences continuous operational friction. Hostile incursions involving water cannon deployments and intentional vessel rammings against Philippine resupply missions at 2nd Thomas Shoal and Sabina Shoal occur regularly. To manage this volatility, the ASEAN chair is driving intense, accelerated diplomatic negotiations to finalize a legally binding Code of Conduct, COC, for the South China Sea, while the United States and its regional allies maintain regular freedom of navigation operations, FONOPs, to challenge coercive claims. Analysis. The South China Sea is not a localized regional border dispute. It is a global flashpoint for the survival of international law. Over 55% of India's maritime trade passes through these vital waters and the adjacent Malacca Strait. If the South China Sea is transformed into a closed, militarized Chinese lake, it gives Beijing the asymmetric power to choke international trade routes and project naval power directly into the Indian Ocean, presenting a clear threat to India's long-term economic and maritime security. Challenges. Aggressive gray zone weaponization. China's extensive deployment of its massive maritime militia, disguised as civilian fishing fleets backed by the Coast Guard, allows it to execute coercive blockades right below the threshold of open military conflict, complicating traditional defense responses. Advanced island militarization. The successful transformation of tiny coral reefs, like Mischief Reef and Subi Reef, into heavily fortified, unsinkable aircraft carriers equipped with missile batteries and runways, permanently shifts the regional balance of power. Fragmented regional resistance. The varying degrees of economic dependency on China among ASEAN states prevent the creation of a completely unified, unyielding maritime defense front. Way forward. Expanding India's white shipping agreements. Enhancing real-time maritime domain awareness data sharing with all South China Sea littoral states to track unauthorized naval movements. Accelerating strategic defense exports. Building on the successful delivery of BrahMos supersonic anti-ship missiles to the Philippines by expanding defense technology transfers to Vietnam and Indonesia to build local asymmetric deterrence. Strict insistence on UNCLOS compliance. Consistently using every multilateral platform to champion the absolute freedom of navigation and overflight, ensuring all maritime claims remain firmly bound by the 1982 United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. Conclusion. To conclude, the South China Sea is the ultimate testing ground for the future rules-based international order. India's stance must remain clear and unyielding. The global commons cannot be rewritten by unilateral coercion. By strengthening the defense capabilities of littoral partners and maintaining our active naval presence, India firmly protects global maritime freedom and its own strategic borders. Thank you. Topic 8. Belt and Road Initiative, BRI. Hook. Good morning, everyone. Packaged by its architect as the ultimate infrastructure project of the century to resurrect the ancient Silk Road, yet structurally engineered to function as a sophisticated mechanism for checkbook diplomacy, debt trap dependency, and long-range military encirclement. Today, my topic is the Belt and Road Initiative, assessing the strategic implications of China's global infrastructure blueprint. Background. Launched by Chinese President Xi Jinping in 2013, the Belt and Road Initiative is a massive, multi-billion-dollar global infrastructure development strategy. It is split into two primary components: the Silk Road Economic Belt, a network of overland rails, roads, and energy pipelines spanning Central Asia and Europe, and the 21st Century Maritime Silk Road, a highly coordinated string of deep-water port developments spanning the Indo-Pacific, Africa, and the Mediterranean. Current situation. The BRI has entered a phase of severe structural recalibration, transitioning from high-volume infrastructure spending to a leaner model known as small is beautiful. After a decade of reckless lending, numerous developing nations face severe balance of payments crises and mounting debt distress. In response, G7 nations and India are actively scaling up alternative high-quality infrastructure investments under the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment (PGII) and the India-Middle East-Europe Economic Corridor (IMEC) to offer transparent developmental funding options. The modern BRI crisis and alternatives: BRI status democratic counter, debt distress, lean model PGII, IMEC, port alliances. Analysis. From a national security perspective, India was the first major economy to foresee the hidden strategic dangers of the BRI, explicitly boycotting the inaugural BRI Forum in 2017. India's principled objection is anchored on two pillars: sovereignty violation, as its flagship project cuts through sovereign Indian territory, and debt trap geopolitics. By providing high-interest, opaque loans for economically unviable projects, the initiative systematically forces vulnerable developing countries to cede long-term operational control of critical strategic assets to Beijing. Challenges: the strings of pearls encirclement, the transformation of commercial BRI port investments like Hambantota in Sri Lanka, Gwadar in Pakistan, and Ream in Cambodia, into forward dual-use logistics bases capable of hosting Chinese intelligence vessels and submarines. Deep-rooted economic capture. The vast financial dependencies created by active BRI loans make it exceptionally difficult for target countries to vote against Beijing's interests in multilateral forums like the UN. The operational stalling of alternatives. Geopolitical conflicts in secondary theaters can cause operational delays to alternative corridors like the IMEC, requiring complex diplomatic rerouting. Way forward, fast-tracking the IMEC and INSTC corridors, accelerating the construction of the International North-South Transport Corridor, and connecting digital grids along Western Asian nodes to deliver real, high-speed alternatives to the BRI. Expanding asymmetric development grants, leveraging India's Development Partnership Administration (DPA) to provide smaller neighbors with non-conditional grants and low-interest lines of credit for immediate civic infrastructure. Enforcing global transparency benchmarks, using platforms like the G20 to mandate that all transnational infrastructure contracts adhere to international environmental, financial, and sovereignty standards. Conclusion: to summarize, the Belt and Road Initiative has proven that infrastructure can be weaponized to compromise national sovereignty. India's early, unyielding opposition stands fully validated by modern economic realities. By presenting transparent, community-led, and sustainable connectivity alternatives, India protects both its strategic neighborhood and the financial independence of the developing world. Thank you. Topic 9. CPEC. China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. Hook. Good morning, gentlemen. A multi-billion-dollar corridor promoted as a monumental economic game-changer for South Asia, yet structurally serving as a flagrant violation of India's territorial integrity and a direct tool for the military hyphenation of our western and northern borders. Today, I will speak on CPEC, the strategic and economic realities of the Sino-Pak axis. Background. Launched in 2015 with an initial estimated outlay of $46 billion, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor is the crown jewel and most strategic flagship of China's Belt and Road Initiative. It is designed as a 3,000-kilometer network of high-speed highways, railways, fiber optic links, and massive energy pipelines connecting China's landlocked western Xinjiang region directly to the deepwater Gwadar port on the Arabian Sea coast of Pakistan. Current situation. CPEC has stalled significantly due to internal economic chaos and severe security crises within Pakistan. The project faces continuous insurgent attacks targeting Chinese engineers and infrastructure, executed primarily by the Baloch Liberation Army (BLA) and the Tehrik-i-Taliban Pakistan (TTP). Despite massive delays, both nations are attempting to rescue the project by shifting focus to CPEC Phase 2, aiming to build specialized industrial zones and deepwater naval facilities at Gwadar, which remains under intense security surveillance. Analysis. India's opposition to CPEC is absolute, non-negotiable, and based on core international law. The corridor passes directly through Pakistan-occupied Jammu and Kashmir (POJK), sovereign Indian territory currently under illegal occupation. By constructing permanent, long-range industrial and military infrastructure there without New Delhi's consent, China directly violates India's national sovereignty. Militarily, CPEC institutionalizes the threat of a two-front war, allowing the Chinese People's Liberation Army (PLA) to establish a permanent logistic base right next to the crucial shipping routes of the Persian Gulf. Challenges. The militarization of Gwadar Port. The transition of Gwadar from a commercial cargo port into a highly fortified naval command hub capable of hosting Chinese nuclear submarines and tracking Indian naval communications. The asymmetric security drain, Pakistan's deployment of specialized multi-layered military divisions exclusively to protect Chinese assets, diverts local resources but deepens the military integration along India's western borders. Extreme financial insolvency, Pakistan's mounting debt liabilities to Chinese state banks for CPEC power projects have driven the local economy to chronic inflation and structural financial dependency. Way forward, unyielding diplomatic protest and cartographic assertion, maintaining absolute diplomatic pressure across all international forums, explicitly reiterating that CPEC violates sovereign Indian boundaries. Operationalizing the Chabahar alternative, accelerating India's long-term operations at the Chabahar port in Iran, linking it directly to the international north-south transport corridor to bypass Pakistan and secure trade routes to Central Asia. Maximizing anti-submarine warfare (ASW) capabilities, upgrading the Indian Navy's long-range maritime surveillance aircraft and underwater sensor networks across the Arabian Sea to monitor Chinese naval movements out of Gwadar. Conclusion. To conclude, CPEC is far more than a simple transport highway. It is a permanent strategic alignment designed to contain India's growth. Its ongoing economic and security complications prove that infrastructure built on contested, occupied territory is fundamentally unstable. By maintaining absolute military readiness and expanding our own maritime corridors, India ensures its territorial sovereignty remains uncompromised. Thank you. Topic 10. United Nations Security Council, UNSC. Hook. Good morning, respected GTO and my dear friends. The apex global body tasked with maintaining international peace and security, yet structurally frozen in the geopolitical reality of 1945. In an era marked by complex transnational conflicts, the UNSC has increasingly become a polarized debating club paralyzed by historical vetoes. Today, I stand before you to speak on the UNSC, the urgent imperative for structural democratization. Background. Established in the immediate aftermath of the Second World War as part of the UN Charter, the UNSC consists of 15 members, 10 elected non-permanent members, and the permanent 5, the P5, US, UK, France, Russia, and China. The P5 possess the asymmetric power of the absolute veto, allowing any single permanent member to completely block any resolution, regardless of global consensus. While the global balance of population, wealth, and power has altered completely, the institutional core of the UNSC has remained completely unchanged. Current situation. The UNSC faces a deep crisis of institutional legitimacy and systemic gridlock. Recurrent structural vetoes deployed by various permanent members have effectively paralyzed the Council's ability to take decisive action on major international conflicts. Amid this gridlock, the Intergovernmental Negotiations (IGN) framework has seen intensified pressure, with India leading the G4 nations, India, Brazil, Japan, Germany, and the L.69 group to demand immediate, text-based negotiations to expand both the permanent and non-permanent seats of the Council. Analysis. A UNSC structure that completely excludes the world's most populous nation, the fastest-growing major economy, and the leader of the Global South is a historical anomaly that strips the body of real authority. India's bid for a permanent seat is backed by unmatched global credentials. Its status as historically one of the largest cumulative troop contributors to UN peacekeeping operations, a flawless non-proliferation track record, and a demonstrated capability to act as a responsible global balancer during deep international crises. Challenges. The Chinese veto obstacle. China remains the primary structural roadblock, systematically utilizing its permanent position to stall text-based negotiations and bloc reforms under the pretext of seeking a, quote, package solution. The coercive coffee club lobby, the Uniting for Consensus UFC grouping, including regional rivals like Pakistan and Italy, actively lobbies against adding new individual permanent seats to prevent their regional peers from gaining strategic diplomatic advantages. The rigidity of Article 108, amending the UN Charter, requires the explicit approval and ratification of 2/3 of the General Assembly, including all 5 permanent members, giving the P5 absolute control over any reform attempt. Way forward. Leveraging minilateral alternatives, deepening India's strategic operations through more flexible, non-paralyzed frameworks like the G20, the Quad, and BRICS+ to shape global rules outside the UN structure. Expanding the voice of the Global South, continuing to champion the permanent structural representation of unrepresented regions, such Expanding the voice of the Global South, continuing to champion the permanent structural representation of unrepresented regions, such as the African Union and Latin America, to build an overwhelming democratic coalition for change inside the General Assembly. Consolidating strategic bilateral assurances, holding the 4 current permanent members, US, UK, France, Russia, who have officially endorsed India's permanent bid accountable, ensuring their public praise translates into active diplomatic maneuvers during charter reviews. Conclusion. To summarize, a United Nations Security Council that refuses to reform faces the risk of global irrelevance. A reformed UNSC with India at the permanent table is not just a national aspiration, it is an absolute necessity for global balance. By accelerating our independent economic and defense components, India will eventually transform its entry into global governance into an absolute geopolitical inevitability. Thank you. If you enjoyed this complete video covering over 50 lecturette topics, please subscribe to the Think with Shashank channel to boost your